Robert Baratheon stood at the edge of the war camp, his great figure silhouetted against the glow of twilight. Summer's final warmth clung to the air, carrying the scent of grass crushed underfoot and the faint smoke of campfires. It was the hour when the day paused for breath and shadows stretched across the earth, a time that felt like the hush before a grand melody. He could hear soldiers mumbling in low tones behind the tents, alone with the distant clink of armor and harness. The men were restless, anticipating the extraordinary march to come. At the heart of it, two monstrous shapes slumbered under canvas pavilions. The dragons, living nightmares from the age of old Valyria. Robert frowned as he glanced toward them. The beasts stirred a fear and awe in him that he would never voice aloud, not even to Ned Stark. Ned stood a short distance away, scanning the horizon with calm gray eyes. Where Robert's huge frame and booming voice seemed to dominate any space he occupied, Ned's presence was quiet strength. Steady, unyielding, thoughtful. As the shifting evening light traced the solemn lines of Ned's face, he was reminded that neither man was the same youth who had fought side by side in the rebellion so many years ago. They bore new scars, not all of them visible. Yet in this moment, they shared the same memory and the same burden. A realm at war, a mad king to overthrow, secrets that lurked in the shadows. Except now, fate had handed them a power no one alive had wielded in centuries. The tents where the dragons were kept were larger than any field pavilion Robert or Ned had ever seen. Long, heavy poles of oak hammered into the ground to form a framework around which robust canvas was draped. Ropes, staked taut, quivered slightly each time the creatures inside shifted. The dragons had grown quickly under Daenerys' unlikely guidance, though the Targaryen girl was nowhere near their camp now. She had vanished, leaving behind these living weapons in a swirl of half-truths and confused loyalties. The soldiers gave the enclosures a wide berth. Most nights, the beasts roared in a manner that could freeze a warrior's soul, a sound reminiscent of ancient thunder. But tonight, they lay quieter, only huffing or giving an occasional rumbling snort. Rumor held that dragons recognized the measure of their keepers' hearts and spirits. Robert claimed he did not believe such superstitions, but even he did not dare approach them alone. Walking side by side with Ned, the newly minted king of the Stormlands, by the might of rebellion, surveyed the camp. Rows of tents extended in all directions, lit here and there by torches planted in the earth. Some banners fluttered in the evening breeze. The proud direwolf of House Stark, the golden stag of House Baratheon, and the falcon of House Arryn for Jon Arryn's loyal men. There were also smaller lords who had cast their lot with them, banners with lesser sigils of hawks, bears, and blackwood trees. Night was coming quickly now, swallowing the color from their flags and leaving only flickering outlines. Men huddled around campfires where they ate, laughed anxiously, or sharpened swords in silence. Robert's laugh rolled out suddenly as he glanced at Ned. "Would you have thought it, Ned? The day we'd ride for King's Landing in the company of dragons? I remember enough of my lessons to know the Targaryens bested us all those centuries by virtue of these scaly devils. And now they're ours to command, somewhat." "Not ours," Ned reminded him quietly. "We only keep them. They may allow us to ride into King's Landing, but they have wills of their own." Robert shrugged. "They'll bend. They'll burn the Red Keep to the ground if I tell them to." His eyes flickered with a savage confidence, but then they softened. "We do what we must. The realm can't suffer another mad Targaryen on the throne." Ned nodded, lips pressed in a thin line. "I only hope this will end quickly. War rarely ends swiftly, though." "I know." Robert's voice was surprisingly subdued. "It's a terrible weapon we hold, but it's too late for second thoughts." Ned made a small sound of agreement. He cast his gaze across the lines of men, each with a family name, each with someone awaiting their return. The burden of command weighed heavily on him. He remembered how his father and older brother had been burned alive by the Mad King's cruelty, and that memory haunted him now. The future might demand more sacrifice. Drawing in a deep breath, he forced himself to remain composed, to be the calm eye in the storm that Robert's presence always whipped up. Word had already spread beyond the camp, far into the countryside. The small folk whispered of the black and green dragons soared by day, their shadows slipping over farmland and meadow, sometimes hunting sheep in the far fields. Some took it as an omen that the old Targaryen ways had returned. Others saw it as the gods' sign that the realm was about to be cleansed by fire and blood. No matter the perspective, news traveled fast, and every rumor stoked tension in the hearts of those who heard it. The capital would brace itself. Aerys, the Mad King, could not fail to notice that unstoppable winged might had slipped from his grasp and had somehow landed with his foes. Ned felt the sense of foreboding in the darkening air. Already, ravens had been dispatched to lords still wavering, urging them to turn against the Targaryen king. The next day, Robert planned to set the entire host into motion. The route south would pass over ridges, rivers, and farmland, leading them closer to the seat of royal power. If there was to be a battle, it would be glorious yet terrifying. How does a city defend against beasts that can rain fire from above? The question weighed on Ned's mind, and though he suspected many men in this camp trembled at the same thought, they put on brave faces or sought forgetfulness in cups of ale. A cluster of soldiers to their right burst into coarse laughter, trying to break the tension with jests about how once they reached King's Landing, there would be feasts of roast boar and barrels of sweet wine in the Red Keep. Others prodded at the idea of riding the dragons themselves, an absurd fantasy that teased away the terrifying fact that these creatures were not docile horses. Some men believed that if Robert and Ned had the dragons, victory was assured. But Ned knew that men placed too much confidence in a single advantage. War was unpredictable, and Aerys still had loyal lords, gold, and a city of thousands. There was no telling what cunning defense might be unleashed. Pride had doomed many a conqueror. Robert clapped Ned on the shoulder and turned to walk deeper into the camp. Ned trailed after, boots crunching in the grass as they passed tents arranged in neat rows. Stewards ran errands, carrying water or bread or messages from one part of the camp to another. Blacksmiths hammered iron in makeshift forges, a steady clang echoing across the fields. Horse handlers groomed destriers, speaking in soft tones to keep them calm. The entire host was a living organism, and Ned felt the electric current of anticipation running through every muscle of that collective body. Tomorrow was the day they would set out. They approached the perimeter where the dragons were kept. Guards had been posted at a respectful distance from the pavilions, their expressions careful. The beasts could be heard breathing, deep and resonant, through the canvas. Every breath was like the billow of bellows in a forge. One of the dragons, Ned thought it was the green one, shifted, and the huge shape loomed against the fabric. There was something primal in the silhouette, an echo of an ancient horror. Even Robert's casual bravado did not entirely hide his wariness. The guards parted for them, but both men only came close enough to see that the dragons were indeed resting. A stable boy of no more than 15, wearing a leather vest reinforced with iron scales, dipped his head. "My lords," he said, voice trembling, "they've been quiet tonight. Ate well, I think." Robert peered at him. "Good. Let them sleep. We move in the morning." "There's Waster." "Yes, my lord," the boy replied, stepping back into the shadows with a nervous bob of his head. For a moment, Robert stared at the huge outline of the black dragon, an expression of fascination crossing his features. Once, in the hush of a different night, he had dared to step inside with it. The raw heat of the creature's proximity made his skin prickle, and the eyes of the dragon were like embers, alien and ancient. The memory made a part of him quiver, but he had never shown that fear openly. If these beasts truly recognized his claim to them, as some believed, then the small waver in his heart would not stop them from unleashing chaos on his behalf. That was enough. "I'll see you at first light, Ned," Robert said finally, clearing his throat. "Rest if you can. Tomorrow we begin the march." Ned offered a tight nod. "Try not to stay up all night dreaming of glory, Robert." Robert snorted at that, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then he strode away, powerful steps kicking up small clouds of dust. Ned lingered a moment longer, glancing once more at the looming shapes under the tents. He could not say why, but he felt as though the dragons were awake, peering through the canvas at him. As soon as the thought occurred, he pushed it away and turned back, heading toward his own tent, where quiet respite awaited. The night deepened. Stars emerged, scattering across the dark sky in clusters of white. The moon, a slender crescent, silvered the edges of the camp with a faint glow. Ned's steps grew slower as he approached his tent. He thought of Catelyn, far in the north, waiting in Winterfell. She had written to him with news of Robb and Sansa, tiny and full of wonder. His heart ached for home. The path of war had taken him from the comfortable halls of the north to this southern field, standing guard over dragons. If the old stories were true, the Targaryens had used these creatures to forge the Seven Kingdoms from the fires of conquest. And now Ned was about to use them to unmake a king. He would not relish it, but he would see it done. Inside, the lantern glow was soft. A squire greeted him, helped him shed his cloak, and offered a basin of warm water. Ned washed the dust from his hands and face, as though trying to wash away the guilt of what they might soon do. The tent smelled of oiled leather, steel, and the wax of a single candle flickering on the table. A small bedroll lay set to one side, though Ned rarely slept deeply during these nights. There was always the unquiet swirl of memories and the dread of future battles. Even so, he forced himself to settle on a camp chair, carefully unlaced his boots, and placed them near the entrance for easy reach in the morning. He attempted to read a letter from Catelyn again, but the candlelight and his own tired mind could not hold focus on the words. Instead, he simply closed his eyes. He dreamed of a crypt beneath Winterfell, of dead kings of the north whispering in the dark, and dragons prowling behind each pillar. He saw ice creeping along the stone floor, heard the flap of great wings echo across empty halls. When he turned, the silhouette of a crowned figure was there, speaking in a voice thick with madness. "Fire," it said. "Let it all be fire." Then, everything turned to ash. Ned woke abruptly. A faint glimmer of pre-dawn light seeped through the tent. He exhaled to calm himself and rubbed his face. The world was still, though somewhere outside he could hear men stirring. One of the dragons let out a deep-throated groan, which carried across the camp like distant thunder. Ned inhaled, counting his breaths until the tremor in his chest subsided. Then he rose, buckled on his sword belt, and stepped outside to greet the dawn. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Robert called the lords and commanders to gather. Pale light stretched across the wide fields, illuminating the entire host of men as they began to break down tents and harness horses. Voices carried through the cool morning air. Calls for supplies to be loaded. Horns sounding. Knights rallying their squires. Ned crossed the rows of rousing soldiers to join Robert near the front. There, the black dragon stood just outside its enclosure, a terrifying mass of scales and sinew. Grooms were busy hooking thick leather straps around the creature, forging the contraption that would serve as a harness. The dragon's eyes were bright as molten gold, fixed on the horizon with lethal intent. A wave of heat rolled off its hide. A hush fell over onlookers each time the dragon turned its head. Some stepped back in cautious reverence. Robert stood close, though not so close as to tempt fate. He wore polished armor that gleamed in the sunlight, the antlered helm under his arm. The swirling stags of House Baratheon were etched across his breastplate. Behind him, the smaller green dragon was also being readied. Its head pivoted lazily, mouth parted to reveal rows of dagger-like teeth. Ned approached, giving each beast a respectful distance. "All is ready," Robert said. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had already worn a crown, though ironically, they were yet to unseat the Targaryen who still sat the Iron Throne. "The men will ride at a steady pace for the first leagues. I'll scout ahead on wings." He paused, letting the words settle in the air, then let out a gruff laugh, as though it was still absurd to him. "On dragonback." Ned nodded. "Be sure you don't stray too far. A creature that flies might grant you freedom, but we must keep our host secure." He felt an uneasy thrill in his stomach at the sight of Robert preparing to mount a dragon. It was a spectacle he never imagined in his lifetime. Robert clapped Ned on the shoulder again, leaning in. "I may scout, but I'm not a fool. Still, I'll not deny that part of me wants to see how high these devils can climb." His laugh echoed, but it was tinged with the recklessness that so often fueled the man. The black dragon snorted, releasing a puff of hot breath. The harness was strapped in place, decorated with dark leather and steel buckles. It was a clumsy contraption made by blacksmiths, with only the vaguest idea of Targaryen saddle lore gleaned from old scrolls. Whether it would truly keep a rider secure during flight, none could say for certain, but Robert's bravado prevented him from dwelling too long on the possibility of disaster. On the other side, the green dragon accepted its harness in a more sedate manner. It flicked its tail, the barbed tip carving a shallow furrow in the ground. Ned eyed the beast warily, but to his relief, it allowed the squire to tug the final buckle into place. As the host prepared, horses were lined up in columns, knights perched on their saddles, foot soldiers carrying spears and swords trudging into formation. The horns sounded again, this time more insistent. The signal to march. Robert gazed at Ned. Let's see how the realm greets the old power of dragons at our command. I'll meet you ahead on the road. Keep the men moving. With the help of 3 stable hands, Robert placed his foot in a crude stirrup and clambered onto the beast's back. The black dragon shifted beneath him, letting out a low rumble that rattled the nearby tents. The men scattered, giving the pair wide space. Robert's fists gripped the front of the saddle, and in a moment that seemed both comedic and awe-inspiring, King Robert Baratheon of the Stormlands, Rebellion Victor, balanced himself astride a living relic of the world's darkest legends. A single heartbeat passed, and the dragon unfurled its wings with a deafening snap. Dust billowed. Another heartbeat, and the creature's massive legs coiled like springs. It launched itself into the sky, wind roaring against Ned's ears. Soldiers cried out, some in fear, some in exultation. Robert's laughter boomed as the black dragon beat its wings, ascending in great arcs. Leaves and loose bits of canvas whipped about. Then the beast soared away from the camp, leaving Ned and the entire host staring at the shrinking silhouette above. Ned exhaled, forcing his pulse to steady. It was a sight beyond any childhood story, the living proof of what House Targaryen once commanded, now bent to the cause of a Baratheon. If the gods had any sense of irony, they surely were laughing at the realm below. Ned shook off the momentary awe and turned to face the men. Sir Wendell Manderley, a broad-shouldered knight from White Harbor, approached with helmet in the crook of his arm. "My Lord Stark, shall we begin?" "Yes," Ned said, summoning the firm tone expected of him. "Lead the vanguard south. Keep ranks tight. We march at a measured pace. The dragons scout from above, but we rely on our own vigilance as well." The horns sounded for the 3rd time, their deep notes carrying across the fields. Like a wave, the host began to move. Horses snorted, hooves clopped, wagon wheels creaked. The foot soldiers marched in step, dust rising around their boots. Flags fluttered overhead. The green dragon, with another fearless volunteer rider named Sir Garrison, took flight after a few bounding steps. It was less dramatic than Robert's ascension, but no less impressive. Soon, both beasts soared in broad circles above the departing army, blotting out the morning sun with their shadows. An undercurrent of excitement rippled through the men. They might be marching into danger, but they marched behind unstoppable myth. The clank of arms and the rumble of hooves became the day's heartbeat. Ned took his place with the forward ranks, riding his own warhorse. The stallion, a gray courser, snorted and jerked its head, unsettled by the dragons overhead. Ned kept a firm hand on the reins, murmuring calm words to keep the beast steady. Beside him rode several lords loyal to House Stark, a few Karstarks, flinty-eyed and quiet, and the eldest son of House Glover wearing the mailed fist sigil upon his cloak. They were good men, tough from the northern winters, but none had ever fought with dragons at their side. The land rolled ahead in gentle hills and stretches of farmland. Small folk along the road gawked at the passing columns, some offering what little they had in homage, others scurrying inside huts in fear. The rumor of dragons soared overhead, sending livestock into panic flight. Ned witnessed a flock of sheep scattering as the green dragon roared from the clouds, though it did not stoop to snatch one. Perhaps the presence of a rider somehow guided its restraint. The host pressed on, and the day grew warmer. By midday, the columns halted briefly near a slow-moving river, letting men and horses water themselves. Tents were not erected for such a short stop, but cook fires were lit and salted beef was distributed. The men ate in subdued conversation, casting glances at the sky. The dragons circled lazily, occasionally drifting beyond sight. Ned chewed a piece of bread, washing it down with water, and contemplated the strategy for the next few days. If no large force opposed them on the road, they would reach the outskirts of King's Landing within a fortnight. If Aerys had any sense, he would muster his loyal lords to attempt an interception. But who could stand against dragons? The rebellious seed of doubt nestled in Ned's mind. Some cunning plan might be afoot. Aerys was mad, but not without cunning. And no matter how fierce a dragon, a single well-placed bolt from a scorpion or an unforeseen trap could prove deadly. Overconfidence had brought down many a would-be conqueror. His thoughts strayed to Robert, who was notoriously bold. Would he grow reckless, trusting in the beast under him? A rustle of movement caught Ned's attention. A messenger approached, sweating beneath a leather cap. He half bowed. "My Lord Stark, Sir Wendell requests you at the head of the column." Ned rose, handing off his cup to a squire. "Lead on." He followed the messenger along the lines of resting soldiers. The air smelled of damp grass and charred wood from the cooking fires. At the front, Sir Wendell manderly sat astride a heavy charger, scanning the horizon where the road curved around a thick patch of forest. Beside him were a pair of outriders newly returned, their horses lathered with sweat from a fast ride. The outriders exchanged a look as Ned approached. Sir Wendell greeted him. "Word from the scouts," he said, gesturing to the outriders. "There's a small party of men-at-arms camped a league south, near Crossroads Inn. Banners, presumably Targaryen loyalists, though the scouts did not approach close enough to confirm." Ned nodded, face impassive. "How many?" "50 at most," answered one outrider. "Could be a scouting party of their own, or maybe a levy sent to keep watch. They might run back to King's Landing with word of our approach." "Mametan." No matter what, confrontation seemed inevitable. Ned considered. "We'll send an envoy first to see if they wish to bend the knee or yield. There's no sense in slaughtering them if they'll surrender. If they resist, we show them our might. The fewer men we kill needlessly, the less bitterness will poison the realm later." Sir Wendell nodded at the wisdom. "Aye, my lord. I'll arrange the envoy." Turning the saddle, Ned cast a glance at the sky. But he saw only a pale wash of clouds. No dragons soared overhead at the moment. They had perhaps drifted further along, scouting a wider expanse. He weighed the idea of sending a signal to Robert, but decided against it for such a small matter. Better to handle it quickly, with minimal fuss. The horns sounded again, summoning men to ride. Ned led a portion of the cavalry, about 200 strong, down the road at a measured trot. He did not want the entire host to converge on the small Targaryen party, as that would mean slowing their progress for a minor skirmish. Instead, the rest of the army continued south, but at a slower pace. Dust rose in pale clouds around Ned's riders as they advanced. The farmland gave way to a stretch of wild grass, and then a bend in the road revealed a small inn with a barn and a modest courtyard. A cluster of men indeed stood outside, armed with swords and spears. Their banners were faint in the distance, but Ned recognized the red and black of House Targaryen. Ned raised a hand, halting the riders. He gestured for two men, bearing the Stark banner and Baratheon banner, to ride alongside him. With a small retinue, he approached within earshot and called out, "I am Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, hand to King Robert Baratheon, who commands this band." There was a moment of tense silence. The Targaryen loyalists shifted, uncertain. One of them, a tall man wearing a battered breastplate emblazoned with the sigil of House Rosby, stepped forward. "I am Sir Colin Rosby. In the name of King Aerys Targaryen, I bid you turn back and forsake your rebellion." His words carried a trace of hesitance. He could see the large cavalry presence behind Ned, and the rumors of dragons had likely reached even this remote crossroads. Ned did not speak of the dragons outright. He knew fear of them could be more potent than their actual presence. Instead, he replied evenly, "King Aerys is mad, and the realm stands with Robert Baratheon to end his tyranny. We do not wish to shed blood needlessly. Lay down your arms, pledge fealty to the true King Robert, and you'll be spared." Murmurs traveled through the Targaryen ranks. Some looked uncertain, glancing at one another. Sir Colin Rosby's jaw tightened. He cast a glance back at the men behind him. Perhaps he saw fear, or perhaps he recalled the cruelty Aerys might inflict if he defected. On his face was the struggle of a man caught between an oath to a mad king and the practical reality that House Targaryen was losing its hold. Finally, he squared his shoulders and spoke in a tone that wavered between resolve and resignation. "We are sworn to House Targaryen. We cannot bend to you without seeing the king's command first." Ned nodded, having expected as much. "Then yield. Wait out the war in honorable captivity." "Det." Sir Colin's lips pressed into a thin line. A hush fell over the small courtyard. One of his men stepped forward, rattling with pent-up nerves. "Begging your pardon, Sir Colin, but we cannot fight dragons." He whispered the word as if referencing a demon. "It said they ride overhead, burning entire armies." At that, Sir Colin's face paled. He took a slow breath, so quiet Ned could hear it across the small space. Finally, Sir Colin raised his voice. "We will yield under the condition that we are treated with honor as prisoners of war. I would not see my men slaughtered." "None." Ned inclined his head. Relief mingled with the weary acceptance of another piece in the war's puzzle. "We accept those terms." A ripple of exhaled tension swept through the men. Swords and spears clattered to the dirt. The Targaryen banner was lowered, folded, and placed aside. Ned's cavalry advanced calmly, collecting weapons and taking control of the inn's courtyard. Sir Colin stood with shoulders hunched, avoiding Ned's gaze as if ashamed. But the alternative was a useless death. Ned ordered a small group to remain behind and guard these prisoners, and in this manner, the Crossroads Inn changed from a Targaryen watchpost to a footnote in Robert's unstoppable approach. By the time Ned rejoined the main host, the afternoon sun hung high, beating down on mail and helm. The men marched on, a ceaseless river of steel and grit. The dragons reappeared, shadows crossing overhead, causing momentary panic in the hearts of those watching from afar. Robert descended at one point to speak with Ned, the black dragon kicking up another whirlwind of dust as it landed on a grassy rise. Robert's face was flushed, a wild spark in his eyes. Riding a dragon was an intoxicating experience, it seemed. "Any trouble?" Robert asked, dismounting with the assistance of 4 men straining to hold the dragon's harness. The beast hissed, irritated at being on the ground again. "A small Targaryen scouting party. They surrendered," Ned answered. Robert smiled grimly. "Wise choice. Word will spread, Ned. Soon enough, Aerys's men will be running or kneeling. The city gates will be wide open when we arrive." "Vesamine." "There are always some who want kneel," Ned murmured, thinking of fanatics and those who thrived under the Targaryen regime. "We must be prepared for a siege, or for sabotage. We must not assume it will be easy." Robert took a swig from a flask offered by a squire. "Aye, caution is your realm, Ned, and I won't dismiss it. But with dragons we hold the ultimate advantage." "Pray it remain so," Ned said. His gaze traveled to the black dragon's lethal teeth. "I've no illusions about the destruction they can bring." Robert's response was a shrug and a hearty laugh. "Destruction is exactly what Aerys deserves." The march continued, passing farmland turned golden by the late sun, and nearing the edges of a lord's domain that had sworn uncertain allegiance. Another night approached, and with it came the need to make camp once more. This time, the chosen site was near a lake fringed by willow trees, offering a windbreak and ample water for the men and horses. The dragons settled again, huffing with mild impatience, as if they disliked being tethered to mortal demands. The black dragon snapped at a horse that ventured too close, sending the poor beast racing off in terror. Robert only laughed, though the stable hands were clearly shaken. As dusk painted the sky in bands of orange and purple, campfires glowed to life across the lakeshore. Tents were erected more swiftly this time, men falling into a routine. Robert boasted at one fire about the vantage from the dragon's back, describing how he could see the entire host trailing behind him like ants. He recounted glimpses of distant mountains and rivers that no man on horseback would see in a single day. Some laughed, others listened in rapt awe. Ned, quietly eating near his own tent, heard bits of the conversation drift through the night air. He wondered how this new power might shape Robert's ambitions if the war ended. Would he be content to sit the Iron Throne? Or would the thirst for flight push him to new horizons? In the quiet gloom, while the men engaged in subdued celebration of their bloodless victory that day, Ned took a solitary walk along the lake's edge. Water lapped gently at the shore, reflecting the dancing lights of the campfires. He paused beneath a willow, mind heavy with questions. The war he had helped to start was nearing its climax. The Mad King would be toppled, that much was certain. But what price would be paid in blood and fire? Would the realm unite under Robert's rule? Or would the addition of dragons sow new seeds of fear? A flicker of movement in the shadows made him turn. It was a cloaked figure, close enough that Ned's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword. Then the figure stepped forward, revealing the stern features of Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother. Stannis wore a pinched expression as if perpetually displeased. "Lord Stark," Stannis greeted, dipping his head slightly. "I saw you walking. Thought we might speak." Ned relaxed, taking his hand from the hilt. "Stannis, of course." Stannis' eyes flicked over the lake, then back to Ned. "Robert's confidence runs high. The men feed off it. I suppose that's good for morale. But you must have concerns as I do." Ned nodded, for Stannis was known for his bluntness. "I do. This war might end quickly, but the use of dragons cannot be undone. Once we unleash them on King's Landing, the damage," Stannis cut in, tone clipped. "We must plan carefully. The city is full of innocents. If the dragons are let loose, countless lives could be lost in the flames. I know my brother's anger at Aerys' atrocities, but he must not become what he hates." Their words hung heavy in the air. Ned felt a grim kinship with Stannis' logic, though he wished Robert possessed more caution. "I'll speak with Robert. For now, he only means to threaten. But when steel meets steel, men's tempers and dragons' fires are not easily controlled." "Mantium?" Stannis' mouth twisted. "If the city surrenders before the gates are breached, all might be spared. But Aerys could order the entire city to fight or burn it himself. He's done worse." The mention of wildfire haunted Ned's thoughts. The Mad King's obsession with flames was well known. If cornered, he might burn King's Landing from within. He silently prayed that it would not come to that. "Thank you for sharing your concerns," Ned said. "We'll keep a firm rein on the beasts if we can. The last thing the realm needs is another tragedy." "Nile." Stannis nodded, expression grim. "We'll do our duty, as always." They parted without further ceremony, two men bound by duty and a shared sense of foreboding. Ned gazed once more at the sleeping camp. The silhouettes of the dragons stood out, hunched lumps under the pavilions, occasionally shaking their wings in agitation. The fires had died down to embers. Men had crawled into bedrolls to seize what rest they could. Ned returned to his tent and, once alone, sank onto a low stool. The air was cooler here by the water, and he pulled a cloak around himself. He thought of the next day's march, and the next after that, until they reached the capital. He imagined the final moment when the dragons might roar above the Red Keep, commanding the entire city's submission. The memory of what Aerys had done to his father and brother flared in his mind, and for a fleeting heartbeat, Ned felt a rush of dark satisfaction at the thought of the Mad King quaking in fear. But the emotion curdled. He did not want more death than necessary, no matter how tempting vengeance could be. Honor demanded restraint. Night settled heavily, and Ned let exhaustion tug him into restless sleep. This time, the dreams were less vivid, though still he sensed flames dancing at the edges of his consciousness. He stood at the foot of a great throne made of swords, with scaly silhouettes winding around the pillars. Muffled screams sounded from somewhere out of sight. When he turned, he saw his father's face, pale and still, and behind him, Robert holding a flaming sword. The dream dissolved into smoke before Ned could speak. He awoke before dawn to the call of horns, more insistent than usual. Outside, men scrambled, voices rising in the low light. Ned rushed to strap on his sword belt, boots half-laced, stepping out into the morning gloom. The sky was a dim gray. Something was amiss. He spotted riders bearing torches near the dragon pavilions. The green dragon's shriek rent the air. It was not a roar of aggression, but a cry of agitation. The black dragon answered, a thunderous bellow that shook the ground. Ned's heart jumped. He hurried in that direction. A ring of soldiers stood at a distance, uncertain how to approach. Robert was there, armor only half fastened, barking orders. One of the tents had partially collapsed, tangled around the black dragon's flank. The creature was lashing its tail, tearing through canvas and rope. The green dragon was clearly agitated, shifting restlessly and snapping at anyone who ventured too close. Sparks spat from its nostrils. Ned joined Robert, who was shouting, "Keep back! Gods be good, keep back until it's free of the damn tent." Marwan? Stable hands tugged at the ropes from a safer angle, trying to free the black dragon's hind leg. The beast roared, flexing its wings, and a sudden blast of heat flared from its mouth. Fire spurted, igniting the shredded canvas in an instant. The watchers recoiled, some crying out in alarm. Within heartbeats, half the tent was ablaze, casting violent shadows across the dawn. The black dragon, now half shrouded in flame, whipped its tail and shattered one of the support poles. The top collapsed in a flurry of sparks. Ned coughed in the sudden smoke, eyes stinging, adrenaline surging. "Get water," Robert bellowed, face twisted with concern. "Put out the damned fire before it spreads. Hurry, you fools." Men scurried, hauling buckets from the nearby lake. Within moments, the smell of smoke and wet ash thickened the air. The black dragon, freed from part of the entangled ropes, stumbled from the burning wreckage. It spread its wings in a frantic gesture, sending a swirl of burning embers into the sky. Nearby soldiers shielded their faces. The green dragon hissed, bounding away to keep distance. Ned spotted the stable boy from before, cowering behind a barrel. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. Flames crackled all around them. Robert approached the black dragon carefully, ignoring the frantic warnings of men. With a steady voice he cried, "Steady! Steady now!" He advanced with a palm out, as though calming a spooked horse. The creature snarled, but did not belch more flames. Its eyes glowed, reflecting the flicker of the burning remains of the tent. Smoke wreathed around them both. Slowly, unbelievably, the dragon lowered its head, allowing Robert to step closer. Ned watched, tension gripping his throat. Another moment, and it could all end in fire. But Robert reached out, resting his gauntleted hand on the black dragon's scaled neck. The beast's breathing came in angry huffs, yet it let him come near. Soldiers peered on, half expecting the worst. "It's all right now," Robert said in a firm but calm tone. "Come on. Let's get you clear of this damn mess." The black dragon's wings folded with a rustle of leathery membranes. Its tail lashed, but more controlled. The flickers of flame around its nostrils subsided. Robert gestured for the stable hands to lead it away from the flames. Carefully, they coaxed the beast step by step until it stood on scorched grass, panting but unentangled. The green dragon allowed men to approach more closely, though it was alert and tense, as though ready to defend its fellow if threatened. Buckets of water were sloshed onto the last of the burning canvas. Smoke rose in lazy columns, lit by the early sun. Soldiers coughed, rubbing their eyes. Miraculously, no one lay dead, though a few had singed arms or superficial burns. Ned finally let out a breath. The tension broke, replaced by a relief that they had avoided a worse disaster. Robert turned to Ned, face smudged with soot, and let out a hearty, half-hysterical laugh. "Seven hells, Ned. We nearly lost a dragon to a damned tangled tent." His laughter subsided into coughing. "We'll have to be more careful." Ned nodded, expression grim. "This is the power we're dealing with. Even a mishap like this could cost lives." Robert wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a smear of black. "We'll put them in an open pen from now on. No more tents. The beasts can sleep under the stars for all I care." He lowered his voice so only Ned would hear. "Gods, my heart nearly stopped." Ned forced a tense smile. "I'm glad you were able to calm it." Robert nodded, glancing at the dragon's broad back. It seems it's decided to trust me. Let's just hope it proves loyal all the way to King's Landing." With that, the men set about reorganizing, packing what had not burned, tending to minor injuries, and ensuring the dragons were settled. Though it was early, Robert decided they would move on within the hour. No one wanted to linger around smoldering ashes and raw memories of how swiftly dragons could unleash devastation. Even by accident, Ned oversaw the final check of the ranks, feeling exhaustion weigh on him. They had not traveled far yet, and King's Landing still lay weeks ahead. The burden of the beast's power was more keenly felt than ever. As they resumed the journey, the dragons soared overhead, no longer tethered or enclosed, but free under the morning sky. Men marched in their shadows. Ned tightened his grip on the reins and tried to steel himself for all that lay ahead. The city would not fall without cost. The presence of dragons might speed or complicate that fall in unexpected ways. With each step south, the illusions and bravado about their unstoppable advantage seemed more fragile. War did not favor illusions, and neither did dragons. They were real, hot-blooded, living testaments to an age of conquest. Yet they were creatures of chaos. To harness them was to dabble in doom as much as in glory. He caught sight of Robert flying overhead, a distant figure astride black wings, crossing the sun. Men cheered from below, convinced that they followed a legend. Ned kept his counsel. The only truth he clung to was that war would end in blood, and dragons would not discriminate between friend or foe if provoked. Time would tell whether this power they wielded would deliver them victory without sorrow. For now, he marched on, hearing the steady thrum of thousands of footsteps, the rumble of wagon wheels, and the monstrous beat of wings in the sky, all converging on King's Landing and the destiny that awaited them all. Ka. Morning light slanted across the fields, filtering through thin cloud, and the marching columns stretched onward like a tapestry unrolling over the land. The rumble of war horses, the footfalls of soldiers, and the creak of supply wagons made a ceaseless hum under the open sky. At intervals, one or the other of the dragons would pass overhead, swooping close enough for men to catch a glimpse of serpentine grace before the creatures ascended on sweeping wings and vanished behind the clouds. Each time that dark silhouette soared across the sun, soldiers paused in something akin to reverence, as if the sight froze the moment in amber. Ned Stark rode near the front with a cadre of lords, his eyes ever watchful on the horizon. He felt the press of heat through his riding leathers, and his stallion, still wary of the dragons, whickered now and again, as though expecting those beasts to descend without warning. The fields here were gentle, broken by occasional stands of trees, the ground rolling in soft swells. Summer's final green had begun to yellow, though patches of bright wildflowers still dotted the ditches. Small wonder the men sometimes let their minds wander to simpler thoughts. The smell of bread baking, the memory of wives or children far away. But there was no outrunning the purpose that pulled them south, no ignoring the fact that each league taken brought them closer to King's Landing. Robert circled overhead from time to time. Even without seeing the black dragon, the roars and the thunder of its wings gave him away. There was a brazen gusto in the way he chose to fly lower than necessary, so that the wind from the dragon's wings swept across the host in a sudden gale. Men would raise shields or duck their heads, and Robert's laughter would carry down as if he wanted them all to share in his exhilaration. Ned tried not to dwell on the uneasy reminder that their advantage, these dragons, was also a precarious partnership. The beasts obeyed in part, but they were no docile hounds. Each time the green dragon hissed at a soldier who ventured too near, or the black one loosed a small gust of flame to warm its belly, Ned's mind returned to the near disaster of the burning pavilion. By midday the columns crested a ridge from which they could see a wide plain unfolding to the south. The river meandered farther east, and the road wound closer to the low hills on the western side. Word came from scouts that a holdfast belonging to a minor lord loyal to the Targaryens was only a half-day's ride away. Ned and Robert had conferred that morning about how to handle such loyalists. Some would bend the knee easily upon seeing dragons and a large host. Others, out of misplaced valor or fear of the king's retribution, might try to resist. There had been talk that the lord of that holdfast was an elderly man with no heir, a recluse who seldom left his lands. Robert had only snorted and said, "Then he'd be wise to open his gates with courtesy, or those gates shall burn." As the men clattered down the road, dust rising in pale clouds around their boots and hooves, Robert once again took flight. Ned watched him go, noticing how skillfully, perhaps even rashly, his old friend handled the dragon. Robert had discovered some measure of rapport with the beast, as though the black dragon was drawn to the same bold blood that fueled him. The green one was not as quick to trust its rider, Sir Garrison, who had begun tethering himself tightly with ropes to maintain balance. Ned had overheard a few jests about that from some knights, but Sir Garrison seemed a man who valued caution more than pride, so he tolerated their smirks in silence. That afternoon, as the sun climbed higher, the host approached a sweeping bend in the road. Beyond it lay a shallow valley of patchy farmland, dotted with a few cots and barns. A small orchard glimmered with late apples, though many of the fruits had dropped to the ground, left to rot. The local folk had fled upon hearing of approaching armies or looming dragons, or perhaps they had simply locked themselves inside, hoping to outlast the commotion. Some riders spied a scattering of huts in the distance, shutters drawn tight. Ned kept the columns moving, his expression sober. The small folk had good reason to hide. War gave little mercy. Ahead the path rose again, and there the holdfast perched upon a low knoll, surrounded by a meager wooden palisade. At some distant time, a lord had begun laying stone foundations, but it remained incomplete. Now only a mound of old masonry served as the gate tower. A single tattered banner flew at half-mast. The Targaryen sigil faded from years in the sun. Ned called a halt out of arrow's range and surveyed the place. Even from here, he could see no more than a handful of men on the walls. The holdfast was quite humble, hardly more than an overgrown farmsteading with pretensions of nobility. The wooden gates were barred. Robert, astride the black dragon, swooped overhead in a circle. The walls were low enough for the dragon to land inside if it pleased. Ned half expected the gates to fling open in surrender. He let his horse step forward. The men arrayed themselves in a broad semicircle behind him, lances and swords glinting in the bright sun. They waited, silent, to see if the defenders would parley. A hush fell over the ranks. For a moment, no one from the holdfast moved. Then, at length, an elderly man appeared on the rampart. He wore the tattered remains of what might have been fine clothing a decade ago. In his hand, he held a staff wrapped in cloth dyed with the Targaryen colors. When he spoke, his voice cracked, barely carrying across the distance. "I am Lord Hurston," he called, the staff trembling in his grip. "And I hold these lands in the name of Ares, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men." Robert's laughter descended from above. He circled once more, the black dragon letting out a challenging roar. The noise reverberated along the palisade, shaking the rickety timbers. Men on the walls shrank back. Ned moved forward another pace on his horse, calling up to the old lord. "We are the host of Robert Baratheon, who challenges Aerys' right to that throne. Open your gates, surrender peacefully, and you will keep your life. This holdfast has no means to stand against us. Your fealty to the Mad King will see you burned if you persist." Blah. He tried to keep his tone level, though he felt the old ache of pity for men like this, who had sworn oaths to a king that had grown mad and cruel, twisting honor into a tragic burden. Perhaps Lord Hurston believed he had no choice. The old man's thin shoulders rose, and even from the ground, Ned could see how his hands trembled on the staff. But he only shook his head. "I swore my blood and house to the Targaryen line. That vow I made as a boy, when the king was not yet as he is. I cannot forswear it now, not after a life of service." "Nay," Robert bellowed from the sky. "Then you'll die for a fool's loyalty." The black dragon dove closer, stirring the air. Ned could sense the frustration in Robert's voice. He knew that Robert hated the Mad King for many reasons, personal, political, and otherwise. He had long since hardened himself against any argument that might mitigate the Targaryen brand of tyranny. The fact that Lord Hurston was an old man made no difference. If the holdfast resisted, Robert was prepared to unleash the dragons. Before the defenders could scramble or mount a more coherent response, the black dragon's maw opened, releasing a gout of flame. Men on the walls cried out. The wooden timbers of the rampart caught fire in an instant. Screams echoed. Soldiers behind Ned shifted anxiously. Some cheering Robert's fearsome display, others grimacing. Ned felt a churning in his gut. This was not war as he had once known it, clashing steel against steel, fighting on even footing. This was a slaughter by dragonfire. He could almost taste the bitterness. One portion of the wall collapsed under the sudden weight of flame, charred logs crumbling to ash. The old lord's voice rose in a thin cry. Beyond the swirling smoke, Ned glimpsed him stumbling back into the courtyard, staff tumbling from his grasp. The defenders were scattered, some fleeing into the meager keep, others hurling themselves from the walls in a panic. Robert pulled the dragon up, circling high to gauge the damage. A single pass had turned the holdfast's rudimentary defense into a blazing ruin. Ned gestured to a line of knights. Take a squad and approach carefully. If they lay down arms now, take them prisoner. He did not order more flames. One demonstration was surely enough. The men were no threat. They cowered behind burning timbers, terrified out of their wits. As the knights spurred forward, the battered gate sagged inward, half burned through. From within, a voice rose, hoarse and desperate, crying for mercy. Ned urged his mount closer. The knights parted so he could move up. Smoke billowed across the courtyard, lit by the orange glow of smoldering embers. A few men coughed violently as they staggered into view, dropping weapons. They flinched at the sight of Ned's sword, though he had not yet drawn it. Inside, the holdfast yard was scarcely big enough for a healthy orchard. Goats scattered, bleating pitifully. A handful of men-at-arms knelt in surrender, eyes wide with terror at the monstrous shape circling overhead. Lord Hurston lay near the keep's threshold, partly pinned by a fallen roof beam that had caught fire. Ned dismounted and ran forward, calling for help. Two of his men rushed to lift the beam. Hurston's face was smeared with ash, hair singed, his breath ragged. A quick glance told Ned that the old lord's leg was crushed. He would not long survive such a wound. Hurston's eyes fluttered open. He gazed at Ned with a mixture of regret and relief, as though confused that an enemy knight would kneel beside him instead of letting him burn. "Is it over?" he rasped. So quickly, his voice quivered, and Ned struggled to find words. "It's over," Ned murmured, "though the war was far from ended. Your men have yielded." Above them, the black dragon roared again. Hurston coughed. "I held these lands in the Targaryen name. But the dragons, they are not." He grimaced, pain contorting his features. "It's too late." Ned placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You fought for your oath. No one can question your courage." He gestured for a medic, but the old lord's eyes glazed, and his breathing grew shallow. Hurston clutched at Ned's tunic, voice faint. "Heed the cost of fire. It does not choose." Then his hand fell away, and his chest rose no more. Ned bowed his head for a moment, struck by the man's final words. He felt a pang of loss, not for Hurston himself, whom he had never known, but for the chivalry that once bound them all. Now it lay in ashes alongside this man's loyalty. With a quiet nod, Ned rose. The knights behind him looked uneasy. They had expected to take prisoners, not to witness a burning so swift and final. Some turned away from the scene, muttering about the stench of charred flesh. At a shout, Ned looked up. Robert and his dragon descended into the courtyard, scattering flaming debris. Dust and cinders swirled in a hot gust. Soldiers stumbled back, giving the beast ample space to land. Robert hopped off with a heavy thud of plate. The black dragon folded its wings with a restless hiss, turning its horned head this way and that. Robert took a moment to survey the destruction. His eyes flickered over the collapsed palisade, the smoking timbers, the crumpled form of Lord Hurston. He snorted. Hay chose his fate. He turned his intense gaze on Ned. "We must press on. The men are eager to see the city gates. Let them see what happens to those who stand against us. The rest of the realm will think twice before opposing my rightful claim." Dumb. Ned fought the urge to argue, though he could not hide the tension in his face. "No doubt they will think twice." He looked pointedly at the black dragon's flank. where fresh scorch marks blackened the hide from its own flames. Yet the cost is high, Robert. Even a small holdfast becomes a pyre in an instant. Robert gritted his teeth. Eris has been burning men alive for years, your father and brother, countless innocents. I shall not be gentle with those who shield him. Best they surrender swiftly. There was a bitterness in his voice, an anger that sprang from old wounds. Then he exhaled, gesturing abruptly. Deal with the dead. Gather any supplies worth taking. We'll leave a small detachment to hold this place in my name. Move quickly. We have many leagues yet. A muscle twitched in Ned's jaw, but he bowed his head. As you say, Your Grace. He turned away, signaled to a group of soldiers to see to the remains and to secure any survivors. Smoke and sorrow clung to the yard like a pall. Dusk would not be far off, and the reek of ash would follow them on the wind. Within an hour, the holdfast had been pacified. The gates were left standing in half-burnt ruin, with a few men posted behind them to keep watch and to bury the dead. The rest of the host resumed its march south, carrying the memory of seared walls and an old lord's final stand. Robert ascended on his black dragon once more. The green dragon followed, albeit more reluctantly, as Sir Garrison urged it aloft. Ned rode in the dust with the bulk of the army. Conversation among the men was subdued. The demonstration had unsettled even the fiercest veterans, who were unused to such lopsided carnage. Evening stretched across the sky by the time they made camp near a shallow stream. They had spared themselves a lengthier stop earlier, so the men now seized the chance to rest. Pavilions rose, ringed by torches. Despite the hungry jaws and unpredictable tempers of the dragons, all realized that the creatures needed a place to settle for the night. Tent-like enclosures had proven dangerous, so the quartermasters hastily erected a crude open pen made of tall wooden stakes. The black dragon bristled at being herded, but Robert's firm presence, and the memory of fresh flame, kept it from lashing out too violently. The green dragon paced inside, flicking its tail with agitated hisses. Ned had no appetite for the evening meal, but he forced himself to eat a few slices of salted pork, mindful that he needed strength. He drank water from a leather flagon rather than ale or wine. Around him, some of the lords feasted more heartily, determined to keep spirits high. Robert himself sat in the largest pavilion, half in his armor still, regaling those around him with a rough, half-laughing recount of the holdfast's swift end. "Burned like kindling," he proclaimed, tearing a hunk of bread in half. "If the Targaryens think they can match that, let them try." A few cheered, but others shared glances that Ned did not miss. War was no stranger to them, yet the rules of engagement had changed. Before, there was some semblance of risk on both sides. Now the dragons gave them a near-invincible advantage. Near, but not absolute. Ned wondered how long it would be before Eris attempted some desperate countermeasure. He thought of wildfire, rumored to be stockpiled in the city. The memory of that insidious green blaze flickered in his mind, recalling how the Mad King had threatened to immolate thousands. That fear overshadowed any triumph they gained from the holdfast as destruction. Ned left the pavilion, uneasy. He wandered past rows of smaller tents, men's voices drifting in the warm summer night. A few hammered out repairs on buckles, others polished blades. One man carefully used a whetstone on his spearpoint, while humming a quiet tune of the north. Ned saw the glint of hope in some eyes, but also the haunted weariness in others. The knowledge that they had dragons at their disposal gave them confidence in victory. Yet the images of flaming bodies haunted them too. He continued until he reached the edge of the encampment, where the pen for the dragons rose in a jagged ring of wooden stakes. Guards had been posted around it, all keeping a respectful distance from the beasts. The black dragon lay curled, half drowsing, occasional plumes of smoke wafting from its nostrils. The green dragon prowled slowly, rustling its wings. Ned watched them from behind the guards for a few silent moments. In the firelight, their scales caught a ruddy sheen. Their eyes gleamed, bright as embers. He recalled what old Hurston had said. Fire does not choose. He was reminded that these were living storms, harnessed for a purpose that might spare or destroy countless lives. Even Robert's personal bond with the Black Dragon did not guarantee perfect control. One twist of fate, and flames would engulf friend and foe alike. Ned prayed that it would not come to that. He turned to go, but found Stannis Baratheon approaching with his usual pinched expression. "Lord Stark," Stannis greeted quietly, glancing at the dragons. "I saw you lingering." "I wanted a moment's reflection," Ned replied. He nodded toward the black dragon's hulking form. "A fearsome ally we have." "Fearsome is not always wise." Stannis let out a measured breath. "But today's business unsettled many. Robert is triumphant, but some wonder if the realm can withstand what's to come when we stand at the gates of King's Landing. The Mad King has no reason for restraint." They both fell silent. A breeze rustled the camp, carrying the smell of burnt wood from the day's fires. At length Stannis said, "I hear your concerns. If Aerys has wildfire stashed within the city, and no doubt he does, he may attempt to burn his own subjects, rather than let us claim the city. But if we strike fast, the dragons might neutralize any ground defense. The danger is in the hidden caches. The city is large, too large to scour in a single day." Then, Ned's shoulders sagged slightly. "We can hope the sight of dragons overhead compels the city to surrender before Aerys can give such an order, but he might do so out of sheer spite or madness. I fear that in the moment of our greatest triumph, we'll face the worst tragedy." Stannis folded his arms, lowering his gaze. He seemed to weigh his words. "We must plan carefully. Perhaps if we send envoys to the gates, telling the people that if they yield, no harm will befall them, the small folk might turn on Aerys. He's not loved from what we hear. If the city rose up in our favor, it might hand us victory without widespread destruction." Ned considered the idea. "It's a hope worth seizing, though we'd need men on the inside to coordinate such an uprising. The gold cloaks in the city watch might be swayed if they think Aerys is finished." Stannis' mouth formed a thin line. "We have corresponded with some who are disenchanted, but we can't rely on that alone." They were both quiet again, each man wrestling with the knowledge that no matter how well they planned, war was never wholly predictable. Finally Ned said, "We'll do what we can. For now, best get some rest, Stannis. Tomorrow we march again. The city waits." Stannis inclined his head, the gesture stiff. "Good night, Lord Stark." He turned and headed back into the camp, his footsteps crunching in the dry grass. Ned lingered another minute, gazing at the dragons. The green one flicked its tail, eyes slitting at him through the pen stakes. The black dragon gave a low rumble that vibrated in the ground. Ned could have sworn the beast was aware of his presence, perhaps even aware of his troubled thoughts, though that notion was more fancy than reason. Then he turned away, heading to his tent for whatever hollow sleep he could manage. The next morning came with a pall of gray clouds that soon gave way to a soft drizzle. Soldiers trudged through the damp undergrowth and muddy patches of road. The dragons, disliking the rain, roared occasionally, though they still took flight in broad, lazy circles. Robert soared higher than Sir Garrison, often vanishing behind the cloud cover. The men huddled in cloaks, cursing the weather but pressing on. More farmland peeled away on either side, dotted with the husks of old barns or the occasional ramshackle stable. It seemed the folk of these lands had abandoned them at the first mention of war, the fields going to ruin under a half-hearted drizzle. Sometime near midday, the scouts who rode ahead came galloping back. Their horses lathered. They bore urgent news. A Lannister host was marching from the west, parallel to Robert's route, on the far side of a river. The banners of the Golden Lion were confirmed by multiple outriders. Ned's breath tightened. It was widely speculated that Tywin Lannister might decide the outcome by either supporting Aerys or throwing his weight behind Robert. So far, the Lannisters had remained maddeningly aloof. Now, at last, they made a move. Robert landed in a swirl of water and mud, the black dragon's claws digging ruts into the ground. He demanded a full account of the scouts' news. Dripping from the rain, the scout recounted seeing thousands of men at arms, well-equipped cavalry, siege engines. It was an army that rivaled the Baratheon Stark host, though they had no dragons of their own. Robert's face darkened as he listened. Tywin has decided at last to show his colors. But which colors? Does he come as friend or foe? Ned could not provide an easy answer. Lannister cunning was legendary, and Tywin's loyalty often lay with the winning side. But the outcome of this war was not yet sealed, and Tywin might see an advantage in backing the Targaryens, or he might prefer to ally with a rising Baratheon, if the prize were right. The uncertain tension in the ranks was palpable. "It's said Tywin rarely commits unless he's sure of victory," Ned observed. "He may be waiting to see how close we are to toppling the Mad King. If he thinks Aerys is finished, he may try to appear at the last moment to claim generosity toward us. Or he could be marching to lay the city under siege before we can, forcing us to treat with him on his terms." Robert growled low in his throat. "I'll not let that lion get the better of me. We have the dragons, Ned. That's worth more than his gold. Still, we cannot ignore an army of that size." Stannis, who had joined them, spoke up. "What if he means to join us in sacking King's Landing? Tywin has no love for the Targaryens after the humiliations visited on him by Aerys. He could be riding to enact his vengeance. If so, we must be careful. The Lannisters are dangerous allies." Robert slammed a fist into his palm, spattering mud. "Let Tywin come. We'll see if he dares oppose us openly. If he means to join us, he'll bend the knee as any other must. I won't be beholden to House Lannister for my throne." Ned felt a flicker of foreboding. Tywin Lannister was notoriously proud, cunning beyond measure. He might give the appearance of bending the knee, only to gain leverage behind the scenes. If Robert recognized that, good. But it was difficult to guess how easily Robert's temper might be played upon. Nonetheless, the immediate decision was to keep marching. The Lannister host was still a few days away. The columns trudged forward, forging on in the relentless drizzle. 2 nights later, the rain finally eased, and word came that the Lannister host had halted near the River Wend. They seemed content to camp, perhaps waiting for further news. Robert decided not to deviate from his course or to parley. He would not be drawn into a trap or forced to cede the initiative. The capital was the true prize, and each day they marched, the city came closer into reach. There were fewer holdfasts or villages to challenge them now. The smaller lords had either fled or melted into the countryside. A handful of men tried to harass the columns in scattered bands, but the threat of dragons quickly deterred any prolonged skirmish. At one point, a band of brigands tried to ambush a foraging party, only to scatter in terror when the green dragon swooped low, raining a thin jet of flame across the treetops. The men returned safely, though some might argue it was a dangerous overuse of fire to chase a few outlaws. Robert insisted it demonstrated the realm's new order. Ned simply maintained his silence, knowing that moral lines were blurred by the presence of such monstrous might. On the 5th day, after the encounter with Lord Hurston's holdfast, the land began to flatten, and the road widen. Taverns and inns appeared in more frequency, though many stood deserted. The innkeepers who remained were quick to offer bread, ale, or lodging in exchange for promise of protection. The host's vanguard advanced in unbroken ranks, led by a cadre of knights who scouted for traps or watchers. Rumors reached them of the city's growing unease. Word was that King Aerys had executed 3 merchants suspected of treasonous talk about the dragons. Others said the king's own men patrolled the streets with paranoid vigilance, locking up anyone who dared question the Targaryen rule. Some claimed that Aerys was stashing wildfire beneath the dragon pit, or that half the city's population was ready to revolt. The swirl of hearsay only heightened the tension. Robert and Ned camped that night in the shadow of an ancient oak grove. The sky was clear, strewn with stars. The men had dried out from the rains, and the mood was a bit lighter around the fires. Smoke curled into the still air, carrying the aroma of roasting onions and salted pork. Robert sat on a log near the largest fire, drinking from a horn of ale, and occasionally punching the shoulder of whichever knight or retainer was nearest, bursting into bouts of boisterous laughter. Ned hovered at the edges, listening more than participating, as was his custom. In the flickering light, Robert's face glowed with that old spark of bravado. "Aerys will shit himself when he sees these dragons perched on his bloody red keep," he declared, swigging a mouthful of ale. "He built his kingdom on fear, burning men for his own twisted pleasures. Well, let's see how he likes the taste of real dragon fire turned against him." Nah. Some of the knights cheered. Others toasted Robert, though with varying degrees of enthusiasm. It was no small thing to ride under a king who commanded dragons. Even the proud lords who had once questioned Robert's claim now found themselves swept along by his unstoppable momentum. None doubted that the Iron Throne would soon be his. The only question was how large the pyre would be. Ned felt the weight of that question in every breath, but he remained silent, standing behind Robert like a sentinel. Night wore on. Men eventually retired to their tents, or found spots around the dying embers. Ned walked once again, restless, searching for Stannis or any other voice that might share his concerns. Instead, he found an unexpected figure by the dragon pen. Jon Arryn, the man who had fostered both Ned and Robert in their youth, and who had joined them in rebellion. Jon was older, his hair touched with silver, but his countenance was calm and wise. He stood watching the black dragon, which dozed with its great head on its forelegs, steam rising faintly from its nostrils. Ned approached quietly, and Jon sensed his presence. Without turning, Jon spoke in his measured tone. "Dragons, Ned. In my youth, I never dreamt I'd live to see their shadow darken the sky." Ned stopped beside him, folding his arms. "It still feels like a dream at times, though not all dreams are sweet." Jon nodded. "I remember the rebellion, how Robert's fervor won us allies. But we bled, Ned. We fought on equal ground for every victory. Now, with these creatures at our command, we could claim the throne tomorrow, if it were only a matter of flying in and breathing fire. But war is never so simple. Aerys is cunning in his madness. He would burn the city if he thinks we will claim it. In that sense, we face the same problem Daenerys Targaryen's ancestors faced in the early days of conquest. How to take a city without destroying it entirely." Memnetimah. Ned's shoulders tensed. "We want the realm to stand after this, not crumble into ashes. I only hope Robert can see that. He's grown so accustomed to the dragon's might that I fear he'll risk too great a blaze." Jon studied the black dragon's sleeping form. The spine tail curled around a stake of the pen. "Robert is a good man, but he's also a man of strong passions. He hates Aerys for what was done to your father and brother, and for all the cruelty inflicted on the realm. Yet I believe in the end Robert will not burn the city. He wants it as his seat of power, not a ruin." Ned allowed a hint of relief to ease his brow. He must be reminded. Too much righteous anger can blind a man. Jon glanced at Ned. "Speak to him plainly if the moment comes. He trusts you above all others." Ned nodded, letting the words settle. They stood in silence for a moment, gazing at the slumbering beast. In the distance, the green dragon shifted, exhaling a low rumble that caused a few distant birds to scatter from the treetops. Torchlight danced across the beast's scales, revealing the faint pattern of lighter streaks that accentuated its ridges. Ned wondered if the dragons somehow sensed the conversation, if they felt the tension in the air. It was a foolish notion, perhaps. But the way the black dragon's tail twitched, as if in a dream, made him wonder if they dreamed as men did. Of conquest, of flames. Jon eventually touched Ned's shoulder in a gesture of quiet solidarity, then made his way back toward his tent. Ned lingered a moment longer, recalling childhood days in the Eyrie, how he and Robert had trained with wooden swords under Jon's guidance. If someone had told them then that they would stand on the brink of conquering King's Landing with dragons at their beck and call, they would have laughed until their sides ached. Yet here they were, grown men carrying scars, both physical and unseen, stepping ever closer to the final confrontation. Morning broke clear and crisp, the drizzle gone, the world washed clean. The columns marched swiftly, making good time. The horn signaled a steady progression along the King's Road. Occasional travelers or peasants were questioned along the route, offering rumors or half-truths about the city-state. Some said a riot had broken out in Flea Bottom. Others claimed the gold cloaks had arrested a dozen blacksmiths for forging arms rumored to be sold to rebels. The deeper they went, the more clearly they felt the presence of the capital, like entering the gravitational pull of a massive star. On the third day, after the Oak Grove, an outrider returned, breathless, to say that he had beheld the distant sprawl of the city from a hilltop. The Red Keep's towers gleamed in the sunlight, visible even at a league away. A hush of anticipation spread through the ranks. Some men had never seen the capital, and they whispered of its size, its labyrinthine streets, the stench, and the crowds. Others felt excitement surge. At last, the seat of power was near. Yet a tension coiled among them as well. Behind those walls lay a mad king, a garrison of still loyal soldiers, and whatever cunning traps had been devised. Robert wasted no time. He ordered the men to push on, allowing only short breaks, determined to reach the city's outskirts before nightfall. The thunder of hooves and the tramp of thousands of boots echoed across the winding roads. The farmland here was more populated, dotted with manors and mills. Groups of peasants stood in fields, watching silently as the enormous host passed, dragons wheeling overhead. Many knelt in half-hearted gestures of supplication, likely hoping to avoid the fate of Lord Hurston's holdfast. More than once, Ned saw children run behind hedgerows in awe and fear, peeking out at the huge beasts that soared above them. By late afternoon, the columns topped a rise from which they could see King's Landing in full. The walls stretched in a great circuit around the city, dotted with towers, gates, and battlements. The waters of the Blackwater Bay glittered beyond, ships anchored in the harbor like toys scattered across dark cloth. The Red Keep dominated the eastern side, perched on a rocky promontory, its red stone walls catching the waning sunlight. Even from this distance, Ned perceived a sense of urgency, as if the city itself trembled under an unseen weight. A deafening roar broke the hush as Robert, on the black dragon, swooped low over the host. Pointing forward with a gauntleted hand, men raised their swords or spears in a cheer, caught up in the moment. They would make camp close to the city that evening, and on the morrow, they would decide the capital's fate. Ned scanned the imposing walls and the labyrinth of rooftops beyond. This was where Aerys Targaryen still sat the Iron Throne, clinging to his twisted sense of power. This was where Ned's father and brother had been murdered. This was also where a million souls now waited in fear or ignorance for the dragon-wielding rebels to arrive. As the horn sounded, and the host began its cautious advance on the approach roads, Ned felt the gravity of the next day settle upon him like an iron weight. He prayed that the city would see reason, that the gates might open without a river of blood or a rain of fire. Yet the presence of the dragons overhead cast an ominous shadow. They were the ultimate threat, the unstoppable juggernaut that could turn the city's fortunes in a single burst of flame. But as Ned recalled the old lord's last words, he knew there was no clean line between the Punisher and the punished once flames were unleashed. Fire consumed everything in its path. He pressed forward with the men, glancing once more at the silhouette of the Red Keep. Tomorrow, they would stand before those crimson walls, and war's final act would begin. Whether it ended in surrender or in fire was now in the hands of fate, and the hearts of men who might yet choose caution or madness. Ned bowed his head briefly, offering a silent plea for mercy to whatever gods might be listening. Then he urged his horse onward into the deepening glow of sunset, with dragons circling overhead and King's Landing waiting at the edge of night. Morning broke clear and cold, painting the eastern sky with the faintest wash of pink. The sprawling camps of the rebel host unfurled across the plains outside the city walls, banners drooping in the stillness before dawn. Thousands of men roused themselves from uneasy sleep, lacing boots and tightening belts. The quiet shuffle, a collective intake of breath before the day's momentous events. Ned Stark stood beside his tent, breathing deeply of the crisp air. Down the gentle slope, King's Landing waited, a maze of walls and rooftops, a city perched on the brink of fear. Light caught on the Red Keep's towers as the sun emerged, transforming ruddy stone into something akin to molten copper. It was beautiful and menacing at once. He could hear the stirring of the dragons, each in its pen of tall wooden stakes, near the center of camp. Their keepers and stable hands coaxed them awake, mindful to keep a careful distance from snapping jaws. Even from here, Ned caught the occasional hiss or saw the flick of a barbed tail. The beasts were restless. They sensed the tension in the air. Today, all the realm might change. The man who had sat the Iron Throne for too long, Aerys Targaryen, would face the force of an army led by Robert Baratheon and bolstered by dragons. Ned turned, scanning the bustling rows of men. The final hour of preparation had begun. Swords were belted, armor buckled, horses saddled. Knights in half-helms conferred with their squires. Sergeants barked instructions. The rattle of steel was everywhere. Supplies had been rationed carefully, for no one knew how the day would end, whether they would soon feast in the Red Keep or find themselves embroiled in a brutal siege. A sharp roar overhead tore his attention skyward. Robert, astride the black dragon, flew a wide circle around the camp, as though to remind the city that they had come. Men gaped or cheered, raising fists in half terror, half admiration. The wings beat with a thunderous rhythm. As the enormous shape passed close, Ned felt the sudden gust that rippled through the tents, scattering dust. Some of the older knights murmured about how unnatural it was to see a Baratheon on dragonback. Others, mostly younger men, only saw the unstoppable might that would lead them to swift victory. Ned tried to quell the gnawing worry in his gut. If the city opened its gates, all would be well. But what if Aerys refused? The dragons could burn entire sections of King's Landing with a single pass. Thousands of innocents lived there, many with no love for the Mad King, yet no power to overthrow him. A desperate part of Ned still hoped it would not come to that. With a final deep breath, he strode through the lines, checking that his men were ready. On a low rise just beyond the tents, Jon Arryn, Stannis Baratheon, and other high lords awaited him. One by one, they nodded their greetings. Jon's face was calm but guarded. Stannis' jaw was set in that stern way, as if bracing for unpleasantness. The others ranged from excited to grim, reflecting all the facets of men at the threshold of battle. An older knight, Sir Rendell Manderly, wiped sweat from his brow, though the morning was cool. Next to him, a pair of Karstark men exchanged quiet words about the glory of storming the capital. A distant horn blared from somewhere near the walls. Whether it was the city watch or one of their own scouts, Ned couldn't be sure. But it was enough to remind them that King's Landing was awake and watchful. Word must have spread that the rebels were preparing to move. This was no mere threat. The day had come to stake everything. Stannis stepped forward. "We ought to position the foot and cavalry in an arc around the main gate," he said, gesturing to a rough map pinned to a plank. "If Aerys tries to sally out or catch us off guard, we'll be ready. The dragons can fly overhead to cow their defenders. Maybe spook them into surrender before arrows are even loosed. That's the hope." Then, Jon Arryn peered at the map, placing one fingertip over the outlines of the city walls. "King's Landing has multiple gates. We must ensure they don't slip men out the other side. Yet we haven't the numbers to encircle the entire city in a perfect ring. We can only cover the critical approaches." Ned leaned in. "We'll place the bulk of our forces around the King's Gate and the Mud Gate. If the City Watch attempts to break out or if the Gold Cloaks remain loyal to Aerys, that's where we'll see the push. Robert's vantage from the sky will give us warning. And if the Lannisters approach from the west..." He paused. "We still have no firm word on Tywin's intentions, but we keep scouts posted on that side as well." Stannis gave a curt nod. "We must also consider wildfire. The moment Aerys sees the dragons, he may try to ignite caches beneath the streets. If that happens..." He let the thought trail off, and the silence that followed spoke volumes. Wildfire unleashed in King's Landing would be cataclysmic. Ned spoke grimly. "We can't let fear of that stop us, or we'll never approach. We need to present a formidable threat at the gates and demand surrender. We've sent ravens ahead, urging the City Watch to open the gates and proclaim Robert the rightful king, but as yet, no answer." Jon Arryn touched Ned's arm gently. "Let us ride then in strength but not rashness. The city must see that we're determined and prepared to show mercy if they yield." With that, the lords parted to gather their contingents. Horns sounded throughout the camp. The men fell into ranks. War horses pranced, banners were hoisted. In a matter of minutes, the entire rebel host began to move as a single entity, rolling forward across the fields toward the city that had waited for them in mounting dread. The sun rose higher, gilding the battered roads and the stubble of harvested fields. Ned rode near the front, flanked by a column of steel-clad knights on their tall destriers. Behind them stretched rank upon rank of foot soldiers with spears and shields, and behind those, the archers. Further back, supply wagons rattled along in guarded lines. The dragons soared overhead, a pair of living shadows that sent small folk scurrying off any roadside paths. In front of Ned, Ser Wendell Manderley carried the direwolf banner of House Stark. On Ned's other side, the golden stag of House Baratheon snapped in the breeze. One could feel the shape of history shifting with every hoofbeat. They came within arrow range of the city walls. The King's Gate loomed tall, flanked by towers of pale stone. Ned could make out the glint of armor on the battlements, gold cloaks stationed at intervals, though their posture seemed tense. Some had crossbows pointed outward, but none loosed a bolt yet. The presence of 2 dragons circling overhead appeared to keep them from launching an attack. Ned heard a distant cry from the city's side, though the words were lost in the swirl of wind and the thunder of the approaching army. Robert descended on his black dragon, flaring its wings in a show of might. The beast let out a roar that echoed across the battlements, and some of the gold cloaks staggered back. The city's great wooden gates were firmly shut, barred from within. Ned signaled the horns to halt the columns. A hush took hold as the men drew up in formation, just beyond the range of an easy arrow shot. The siege lines were set, though no one wanted to call it a siege yet. They would offer terms. Robert urged the black dragon to land in front of the host, near the foot of the gate. He dismounted with a clank of plate armor, letting the reins drop. But the dragon shifted, tail lashing, as if annoyed by being grounded. Ned rode up alongside him, dismounting in turn. Nearby lords joined them, forming a small party with enough guards to appear strong, but not so many as to provoke an immediate hail of arrows. The men parted to let them approach closer to the walls. Robert raised his voice, powerful enough that even the men on the walls should hear. "I am Robert Baratheon, rightful king of the 7 kingdoms by the choice of its people. I come to claim the Iron Throne from Aerys Targaryen, the mad tyrant who has burned and butchered his own subjects. I call upon the city to open its gates and surrender him to us. No harm will come to the small folk, nor to those who lay down arms. But any who resist will face dragonfire. Let none doubt our resolve." Imagined, his words carried, rolling off the stone. An uneasy stir rippled along the battlements. Perhaps some men wanted to set down their weapons on the spot. Others might be sworn to see the fight through, for fear of Aerys' retribution, if they betrayed him. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant beating of the green dragon's wings overhead. Ned felt sweat trickle down his temple. All it might take was one arrow from a fearful guard, and the conflagration would begin. At last a figure stepped forward on the ramparts. He was tall and broad, wearing the uniform of the gold cloaks. A dark cloak with gold trim, glinting armor, a helm beneath one arm. He leaned over the crenellation and raised his voice. "I am Janos Slynt, captain of the city watch. The King's Gate is barred by order of his grace. We cannot open it to traitors." Robert let out a scornful laugh. "Then you'll perish for a madman. But I grant you one chance more. Turn that gate's key. Set down your arms, let us pass, and we'll spare you. Your king's cruelty has no limit. Don't let him drag you to your own funeral pyre." "Non." Janos shifted, momentarily uncertain. Yet he shouted, "The city watch remains loyal to the crown. We have orders." He hesitated, and that hesitation was telling. "We have orders to hold the city against any assault." Robert's temper flared. "Then I'll give you a demonstration of what you face." He strode back to the black dragon, mounting with more ease than Ned would have thought possible. As soon as his weight settled in the saddle, the beast snarled, flexing its hind legs. It bounded forward and launched into the air, rising with each powerful beat of its wings. Robert circled above the gate. Ned's heart thudded. He knew what Robert intended. Over the city's wall, the black dragon loosed a stream of flame, though not aimed directly at the watchman. Instead, the fire splashed across the top of the battlements, scorching stone and setting the wooden hoardings ablaze. Screams rose, and some gold cloaks ducked or flung themselves aside. Smoke billowed instantly. A portion of the walkway caught, crackling with flames. Ned lifted an arm to shield his face from the heat. In the space of heartbeats, King's Landing had seen a glimpse of what might be unleashed if they persisted in defiance. Among the men on the ground, Some cheered Robert's boldness, brandishing swords in the air. The gold cloaks retreated from the flames, trying desperately to douse them. Beyond the gate, the sound of alarm bells began to clang, a deep, resonant toll echoing across the rooftops. Janos Slint's voice tore across the din. "To arms! The rebels are attacking!" The watchmen rushed to the walls, crossbows angled downward. A wave of quarrels hissed through the air, clattering against shields or burying themselves in the earth at the army's front line. A handful of men cried out, and Ned saw one soldier slump, an arrow in his neck. The city had chosen to fight, or at least the watch had. The horns of the rebel army responded. Knights urged their mounts forward a few paces. Foot soldiers raised shields. A handful of archers returned fire, loosing arrows that arced high and found unlucky watchmen above. Ned inhaled sharply and willed his men to hold. He knew Robert wanted them to see the cost of resisting, but a full-scale assault now might lead to chaos. The city's walls were formidable, and a direct siege would be bloody. Dragons or not, the defenders had the advantage of stone ramparts, scorpions, and possibly wildfire. Robert swooped overhead, guiding the black dragon in another threatening pass. Its roar thundered, rattling the windows of nearby towers. Then, from the corner of Ned's eye, the green dragon swept into view, rider clinging to its harness for dear life. Sir Garrison did not possess Robert's flair, but under his direction, the green beast spat a column of flame that scorched along the base of the wall, making watchmen scramble for safety. The wooden gate began to smolder and blacken. Though it was thick with iron bracing, Ned signaled to the men around him. "Hold formation. Archers provide covering fire only if they continue to shoot at us." A flurry of new crossbow bolts whirred overhead, but most struck shields or hissed harmlessly into the ground. The city watch were frantic, uncertain how to respond to dragons. Some were ignoring the men below, turning every bolt they had skyward, aiming for the scaly shapes that wove about. Over the clamor, a cry rose from near the city's ramparts. "Open the gates! We can't fight dragons!" Another voice cut in, cursing that man as a traitor. A scuffle broke out among the watch. Confusion reigned. Ned peered at the tumult. Some gold cloaks were grappling each other, while others frantically tried to put out flames. The partial meltdown on the walls might have opened a path to negotiation, but Robert's rage seemed to drive him forward. The black dragon circled again, raking the upper battlements with fresh fire. When a group of watchmen tried to muster a scorpion, Robert spotted them and set the device ablaze with a single sweep. Sparks flew, and the men scattered, shrieking. Ned gritted his teeth. This was precisely the nightmare scenario. The city watch pressed into a desperate defense, while Robert battered them with unstoppable force. A sudden gust of wind from the black dragon's wing smacked across the gate, sending clouds of smoke swirling. In the confusion, small side doors that flanked the main gate flew open, and a ragged line of gold cloaks rushed out, brandishing pikes and swords. Perhaps they hoped to drive back the besiegers at ground level, or perhaps their officers demanded a show of resistance. The rebel knights met them with a crash of steel. Horses reared, lances shattered. The gold cloaks, outnumbered and terrified, fought with the wild abandon of men who expected no mercy. Blood spattered across the muddy ground. Ned raised his sword, signaling his men to charge in a controlled surge. The rebel infantry pressed forward, forming a bristling wall of spears. In moments, the gold cloaks buckled, some dropping weapons to flee back through the gate. Others sprawled on the churned earth, mortally wounded. Smoke from the flaming battlements drifted in thick sheets across the fight, stinging eyes and throats. Amid the chaos, the black dragon landed heavily just outside arrow range, pounding the dirt with its hind legs. Robert dismounted once more, handing the reins to a breathless squire. His face was flushed, droplets of sweat glinting in his beard. He strode toward Ned, ignoring the swirl of dust around them. "They'll not withstand another pass of flame," Robert declared, eyes fierce. "We can burn that gate to ash." Ned held up a hand. "My lord." He still struggled with calling Robert "Your Grace" in the heat of battle, though Robert had claimed the title. "If we force the gates by dragonfire, we risk letting chaos spill into the city. The watch inside will fight, or perhaps the Mad King has traps set." We could see half the city ignite. Robert made a low growl in his throat. We can't sit here and let them pelt us with crossbows. If Aerys plans to use wildfire, he'll do it whether we burn the gates or not. Nine. Stannis, arriving on foot, interjected in a clipped tone. True, but the city is already on the brink. Look at the walls. We've sown confusion among the watch. Some might surrender if given the chance. A knight behind them, Sir Glover of the North, spoke up. It's madness to hold back now. The city is reeling from these flames. We should press the advantage. Robert scowled, scanning the trembling gate. Smoke rose from its upper boards. Slint will keep them locked tight. We're done talking. Now, Before Ned could try another argument, Robert turned and swung into the saddle of his waiting warhorse. He bellowed a command. Archers forward. Douse the gate with pitch. Let the dragons feed the flames. The order rippled through the lines. Barrels of pitch were trundled to the front, carried by sweating men who risked arrow fire. The watch on the walls tried to regroup, but many were busy battling localized fires. Arrows from rebel archers peppered the ramparts, keeping heads down. Janos Slint's voice boomed sporadically, urging the men to stand firm, though each dragon pass sent them cowering. Ned found himself caught in the unstoppable current. His position near Robert meant he had to coordinate the next steps. He motioned for the knights to guard the men rolling pitch barrels. Already, a few crossbows had found targets among the pitch carriers, spilling black tar onto the ground. Cries of pain rang out, but the men pressed on, grimly determined. They'd come too far to falter now. The green dragon swooped lower, responding to Sir Garrison's frantic tugs on the harness. A ferocious blast of flame shot over the gates, igniting the fresh pitch in a rush of hot brilliance. Ned felt the wave of heat slap his face like an open palm. A chain reaction took hold, and soon the entire wooden structure was engulfed. Smoke boiled up, thick and choking. The men of the city watched behind that gate must have realized the futility, for some pounded on the timbers from within, crying out that they would surrender. Others tried to fling open the bar, but the heat was too intense. Robert didn't wait. Battering ram, move, he roared, pointing to a group of heavy infantry. They dragged forth a thick log, bound with iron, complete with a rough awning to shield from falling arrows. With a shout, the men advanced at a trot, slamming the ram against the blazing gate. The barrier, weakened by flame, cracked on the third impact. Ember-laden smoke poured through. A fourth blow shattered the timbers, and part of the gate collapsed inward with a deafening crash, revealing a swirling gloom of fire and debris on the other side. A wave of rebel soldiers rushed forward, shields raised, swords drawn. Ned glimpsed the confusion within, watchmen stumbling in the swirling smoke, some dropping weapons to kneel and surrender, others fighting with the desperation of cornered animals. The flames licked at crates and structures just inside the gate's entrance, setting them alight. The city was dangerously close to having a full inferno at its threshold. Ned forced his horse forward, determined to keep the men under some semblance of control. He called out, "No looting, no needless bloodshed. Take surrender where offered, or we risk turning the city against us." A handful of soldiers heeded him, grabbing cowering watchmen and ordering them to drop their arms. Others, fueled by battle lust, hacked at any sign of resistance. Screams mingled with the roar of flames. Above, Robert guided his black dragon to land just outside the gatehouse. "Forward inside," he commanded the knights. "Seize the main thoroughfare. Press to the Red Keep." The plan was to push through the city's winding streets until they reached the seat of power. If the watch broke entirely, the path might be open. But the labyrinth of alleyways and the threat of ambush loomed. Ned raised a hand, gesturing for contingents to split. Some to hold the gate area, some to push deeper. The assault began in earnest. Soldiers poured through the destroyed gate, forming wedge formations to drive back pockets of watchmen. Smoke choked every breath, stung every eye. Civilians peeked from windows or doorways in terror. Some fled deeper into the city, while others knelt in the streets, hands raised, hoping the invaders would pass them by. Ned saw women clutching children and old men huddled behind barrels. The sudden clash of warfare had arrived at their front doors, With no chance to flee, Robert led a column of knights down the main avenue, determined to reach the Red Keep. Ned followed with an uneasy heart. He knew that in these twisting back streets, looters might slip away from discipline. The best he could do was keep the main body coherent and quell any atrocities as he witnessed them. Stannis and Jon Arryn commanded other detachments, hoping to secure the Mudgate or approach from alternative city entrances. Meanwhile, overhead, the dragons soared, though the Green Dragon had to be cautious. These cramped streets, thick with tall buildings, did not allow the creatures to descend easily without risking collisions or entanglements. Robert, ignoring the city's narrower confines, spurred his warhorse along the broad thoroughfare known as the Street of the Flea, heading toward the Hill of Visenya. Shouts echoed on every side. Some gold cloaks tried forming a shield wall at the intersection with Fishmonger's Square, but a charge from Robert's knights scattered them. Blood stained the cobblestones, and Ned found himself pushing past bodies as the rebellion advanced. He shouted for men to accept surrenders, to direct any unarmed watchmen away from the main fight. Occasionally, the Black Dragon swooped overhead, blasting rooftops from which crossbowmen took potshots. Fire spread across the thatched eaves with terrifying speed. Within minutes, smoke blotted out patches of sky, turning mid-morning into a haze of gloom. Some of the city's denizens rose up in panic or in opportunism, looting shops. Others threw stones at the gold cloaks, assisting the rebel cause in a desperate attempt to rid themselves of the Mad King's men. Cries of Baratheon, or King Robert, rang out in scattered corners, but disorganization reigned. Somewhere behind Ned, the Green Dragon roared, possibly checking a street where watchmen had barricaded themselves with wagons and barrels. Ned could only trust that Sir Garrison kept the beast from incinerating half a district. If the fire spread too far, the city would be consumed, and the victory they sought would be a hollow ruin. Robert's knights reached the base of the hillside leading to the Red Keep. The ancient fortress walls loomed high above, built of stone that glowed with a ruddy hue beneath the swirl of smoke. The main gate to the keep was flanked by squat towers and a drawbridge spanning a dry moat. There, the King's Guard had mustered, a shining line of white cloaks and polished armor, the last stalwart defenders of the Targaryen monarchy. Ned glimpsed them from the distance, their cloaks fluttering amid drifting ash. The courtyard behind them bristled with men in Targaryen livery, presumably the royal household guard. Robert paused, reining in his lathered warhorse. He wiped sweat and soot from his face, then raised his hammer. A monstrous weapon, forged in memory of his days fighting Rhaegar Targaryen. "Knock down their gate!" he roared. "Bring the dragons if you must, but we end this here." Ned spurred his mount alongside Robert. "One last chance at parley?" he asked, though he could see the fury in Robert's eyes. The battle had already gone too far, smoke and blood painting the streets behind them. Parley might be a fool's hope, but he had to try. Robert's jaw clenched. "They've spilled enough blood. If they want to yield, they can toss down their arms now. Otherwise we burn our way in and drag Eris out." He beckoned the Black Dragon with a high-pitched whistle, an odd sound to be issuing from the barrel-chested king. The beast circled overhead, then descended in a swirl of dust. The King's Guard braced, some raising shields or lances, prepared to fight or die in defense of the royal seat. Ned's heart pounded as he imagined the conflagration that might ensue if the Black Dragon breathed flame at close range. The Red Keep itself could catch fire, and thousands of people, servants, innocents, could perish behind those walls. Yet Robert seemed oblivious to that possibility, or else unconcerned. He dismounted, stepping forward on foot with the Black Dragon behind him. The beast hissed, smoke drifting from its nostrils. "White cloaks," Robert bellowed. "Your king is a coward, holed up in his tower with his wildfire. Abandon him, and no harm will come to you. Stand in my way, and you die. No Targaryen is worth your lives." "No." The King's Guard stood silent. One, a tall knight with silver hair, called back. "We are sworn to defend the king until death. We do our duty." In unison, their swords were raised. It was a final gesture of loyalty, though some might have privately feared the futility of resisting dragons. Robert sneered, lifting his warhammer. Then die. He strode forward, prompting a ragged cheer from his knights. The black dragon advanced with him, tail swaying. The men of the household guard behind the king's guard wavered, uncertain if they truly wanted to stand fast in the face of living flame. Ned sprang from his saddle, ready to back Robert should the fight commence. But at the same instant, a voice boomed from behind the king's guard lines. "Hold! Hold in the king's name!" Ned craned his neck to see who it was. The king's guard parted slightly, revealing a slender figure in robes trimmed with Targaryen colors. The man's face was drawn, hollow-eyed. Pycelle, the Grand Maester. Pycelle stepped forward, raising both hands. "His Grace commands me to," he faltered, glancing at Robert's dragon in evident terror. "He commands me to negotiate." Robert barked a laugh. "Negotiate? Now, when your city is half aflame?" He gestured toward the pillars of smoke rising across the sprawl behind them. "Your king should have opened the gates this morning." Pycelle swallowed hard, the cords in his neck standing out. "His Grace has made certain pronouncements, but he will grant audience if you come unarmed into the throne room." He shot a fearful look at the black dragon again. "Alone if you will, or with one companion. No more." And everyone saw. A stunned hush followed. Even the king's guard seemed uncertain. Robert glanced at Ned, brow furrowed. "He wants me to walk into his lair, unarmed. Trusting a madman's word. He might have wildfire hidden behind every column." Ned stepped closer, voice low. "It's a trap. Ares would roast you alive the moment you stepped foot inside, and if you tried to bring the dragon with you, we'd burn the keep in the fighting." He turned his head slightly, scanning the outer courtyard. House Targaryen had shown no mercy before. Why would they start now? Pycelle's voice trembled as he pressed on. "The king begs a chance to speak. He claims there is a secret he must share, a revelation that might end this war without further bloodshed." Robert snorted. "He's lying, or he's mad. Either way, I trust no Targaryen's word." Yet Ned could sense a flicker of hesitation in Robert. The impetus to end the day's carnage might hold some allure. He'd lost men in the streets, seen the city in flames. If there was a slim chance that stepping inside the Red Keep could bring a final surrender. Ned dropped his voice further. "If you go in there, Ares might kill you. If he does, the dragons will burn King's Landing to cinders in vengeance, whether we intend it or not. Your men would not hold back." He glanced at the black dragon, which eyed the courtyard with a predator's calm. It could be the end of everything. Robert's jaw tightened. Ares is beyond reason. There is no secret. He's stalling for time while he orders more of his men to fill the corridors with wildfire. No, I'll not walk into his jaws. He raised his voice to Pycelle. "If the king wishes to yield, let him come out in chains and kneel. That is his only chance." "Dalbeam say." Pycelle's expression fell, as though he had expected no less but hoped for a miracle. The king's guard behind him gripped their weapons tighter. Robert waved his free hand toward the black dragon. The beast advanced another step, smoke coiling from its throat. The king's guard tensed, bracing for the onslaught. Then came another interruption. A distant horn blast from the city's western gate, echoing across the rooftops. A second blast followed. Ned half-turned, mind racing. This wasn't one of the rebel signals. A moment later, a scout came galloping through the city streets, weaving around corpses and debris, breathless. "My lord, the lions are here," he shouted, voice raw. "The Lannisters have entered the western gates. Some gold cloaks opened for them. They ride under a peace banner." Robert cursed under his breath, eyes darting from the Red Keep to the city behind them. Tywin, that scheming snake. He's come to join in the spoils now that the city is ripe for taking. He turned to Ned. "Secure the courtyard. I'll have no interference from behind. If Tywin's men approach, hold them at the outskirts until we know their game." "Military." Ned gave a quick nod and barked orders. A contingent of men peeled away from the keep, ready to intercept the Lannister forces if they advanced too close. Meanwhile, the Black Dragon loomed, a tangible threat that could bring the entire Red Keep down in flames if Robert wished. Pycelle and the King's Guard remained in place, uncertain, locked in a standoff that threatened to snap at any moment. The sound of rushing footsteps and shouts echoed in the corridor beyond the keep's gatehouse. More Targaryen soldiers arrived, halberds glinting. They stumbled to a halt upon seeing the black dragon. The tension rose to a razor's edge. On the walls, archers nocked arrows, ready to defend their king's home until their last breath. Overhead, the green dragon roared again, perhaps dealing with some threat in the twisting city streets. The air smelled of burning thatch and spilled blood. Robert raised his hammer. Yield or be destroyed. His voice reverberated off the stone, carrying the weight of a final ultimatum. A hush followed, broken only by the crackle of distant flames and the moans of the injured. Time slowed. Pycelle wrung his hands, torn between terror and some vain sense of duty. The king's guard stood resolute, resolved to fight even if it meant certain death. The Targaryen men behind them glanced from the black dragon to the drawn swords and seemed on the verge of throwing down their arms. Through the swirling haze, Ned caught sight of Robert's face, resolute, furious, but also carrying a flicker of longing to end this. Their victory lay within reach, if only Aerys would come quietly. Yet the Mad King had never been one for reason. Suddenly, a new figure emerged at the back of the courtyard. A slender man in black robes lined with luxurious fur, gold rings on every finger. Varys, the master of whisperers. He raised both hands, calling out in a soft but carrying voice. "My lords, wait!" Even the king's guard half turned. Varys hurried forward, steps quick and light, as though he had no fear of the raging war just beyond the gate. "The king demands your presence." "Damn his demands," Robert snapped. "He can crawl out himself if he wants to keep breathing." Varys's face was unreadable, but a sheen of sweat glistened on his brow. "He will not come out, my lord. He has the queen locked away in her chambers. Wildfire kegs are rumored to be placed in the keep's corridors. If you move against him, he threatens to ignite the entire castle." He licked his lips nervously, glancing at the black dragon's twitching tail. "I beg you, do not force him to such madness. Let me speak with him. Let me see if I can calm him. He may see reason if—" Robert laughed, harsh and bitter. "There is no reason in that monster's skull. But go on then. Speak, if you like. You have 1 hour. After that, I tear this keep apart stone by stone if he doesn't appear." He waved a dismissive hand. Fury coiled around every word. Varys bowed, the motion somehow mocking, then scurried back through the line of King's Guard. They allowed him passage, for the moment seemed balanced between total war and a faint hope that the conflict might end short of total destruction. Pycelle hovered near the front, uncertain whether to remain or follow. Ultimately, he sidled away into the shadows, possibly to find safety, or see if Aerys was truly about to set the keep aflame. Ned exhaled, tension coursing through him. 1 hour. If Aerys refused, the keep might become a blazing tomb for them all. The same might be said for the city if wildfire touched off a wider chain reaction. "We should use the time to contain the fires in the lower city," he told Robert, speaking quietly, "before the entire place goes up." Robert's anger flared again. "I care little for these Targaryen scum." But then he paused, eyes flicking to Ned's expression. He realized that continuing to let the city burn could ruin the seat of his future rule. "Fine. Have the men form brigades to douse the worst of it. Secure any storehouses of grain. Keep the dragons close. If the watch tries to regroup—" He let the threat hang. Ned felt a slight easing of the knot in his chest. At least they would try to save the city from a greater blaze. He pivoted, calling out for squads to rally. Firefighting was a new chore for men used to swords, but necessity demanded it. Soon, small groups of rebels were moving through the winding streets with buckets and salvaged water barrels, trying to smother or soak the flames that licked along rooftops. Some city folk joined them, grateful for any help to protect their homes. Others shrank away, mistrusting the men who had attacked the gate. While the hour ticked by, Ned made his way around the perimeter of the keep's outer wall, ensuring that the men kept discipline. A minor skirmish erupted near a side postern when Targaryen soldiers attempted to slip out, but they were quickly overpowered and forced to kneel. Another group of gold cloaks surrendered, rather than face the Black Dragon's fury. Gradually, the southwestern portion of the city fell under rebel control. The streets were littered with bodies and rubble, but some measure of order was restored. Ned paused in an alley that afforded a clear view of the Red Keep's massive walls. He saw the Black Dragon perched on a wide courtyard corner, with Robert standing watch, hammer in hand. The king's guard had withdrawn a short distance, apparently waiting for Varys' return. Smoke still trailed from the top of the central tower, where a stray shot from the Green Dragon had ignited a portion of the roof. For all anyone knew, Aerys was inside, rummaging among barrels of wildfire. The threat made Ned's heart pound. If the Mad King decided to die in a blaze, he would take the entire fortress, and perhaps half the city, with him. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering the crypts of Winterfell, the stony silence of his ancestors. He thought of Catelyn, waiting for news in the north. He imagined how she would react if word came that Ned had perished in a wave of green flame that took the capital. There were times he wondered if it had been folly to embark on this war. But there was no turning back now. Aerys' tyranny could not be tolerated, not after all the blood he had spilled. Dragons or no dragons, the rebellion had come to the final note of its grim song. The hour must have nearly elapsed when shouts arose from the keep's courtyard. Ned hurried through the rubble-strewn passages to rejoin Robert. He arrived to see Varys stepping back out through the gatehouse, face pale as death, speaking urgently to Robert. The Black Dragon loomed behind them like a living sentinel, eyes fixed on the keep's entrance. Varys' voice shook. "He will not yield. He calls you a usurper. Says he will see King's Landing light up the night sky before bending a knee." Varys dabbed sweat from his temple with a silk handkerchief. "I tried to reason with him, but he's beyond reason. He holds the queen and her ladies as hostages, threatening to burn them along with himself. He has appointed men to guard the wildfire casks. Varys swallowed thickly. "He means to blow us all to the seven hells." Robert's eyes were wild with fury. "Then so be it. We break those doors, break him. The dragons will purge the keep if needed." Ned spoke up, voice taut. "If we ignite wildfire, the entire city could go up in a chain reaction. The keep might be loaded with the substance. We cannot just blast our way through with dragon fire. That's exactly what Aerys wants." Robert's grip on his hammer tightened. "You think I don't see that? But what choice have we?" He glared at Varys. "Is there a path inside that avoids these caches?" Varys pressed his lips together. "They are scattered. One in the dungeons, two in the courtyard wells. More rumored near the throne room. He's had years to scheme. I do not know every spot. If you send men inside, they may unwittingly set off the traps. Or if the men hence posted see they are losing, they might light the fuses themselves. The city is sitting on a powder keg of wildfire." Stannis appeared then, armor streaked with ash, a deep frown etched in his brow. "We've secured the Mudgate. The watch there surrendered once they saw the Black Dragon overhead. But word is the king has left orders for them to fight to the last, or burn with him." He paused, looking at Robert with a grim glint in his eye. "We must take the keep swiftly. If we wait, Tywin's host might arrive at the keep's doorstep first and claim the victory, or Aerys might trigger the wildfire out of sheer spite." Robert let out a growl. "I'll not let Tywin Lannister become the savior who takes the city. But, gods, if we storm the keep, we risk everything. If we burn it from the outside, the city goes up. If we go inside, his men might blow it all anyway." He turned to Ned, frustration twisting his features. "What do we do?" Ned's mind spun. He remembered stories from the rebellion of how Jaime Lannister had once stood guard near Aerys, listening to the king's ravings about wildfire. In this timeline, though, Jaime was presumably still in the king's guard somewhere, possibly inside that keep. Was it possible that Jaime would turn on Aerys again? Perhaps that was their only chance, that someone close to Aerys might realize the folly of mass suicide. A short distance away, a cluster of Targaryen household guards that had surrendered were huddled under watch. One of them, half-scorched, stared at the Black Dragon with terror. Ned moved closer, kneeling to speak. "Where are the caches of wildfire? Do you know?" The man's eyes flicked to Ned. He trembled. but said nothing at first. Ned lowered his voice, forging a gentler tone. "Help us spare the city. We'll see you spared if you cooperate." At that, the soldier swallowed. "I only heard rumors." The king had them placed near the stables, near the scullery, under the throne. He said the Iron Throne would be the last to burn. The man's voice wavered. "He's posted pyromancers with torches. They're waiting for the signal." Ned exhaled, rising. Even if they knew the location, sending squads inside would be unbelievably risky. One lit torch near a cask and half of King's Landing might vanish in green flame. He returned to Robert's side, explaining what the soldier had said. Robert cast a glance at the black dragon. "I could send the beast to land upon the throne room roof, tear it open from above maybe. But if we spark that wildfire..." They were at an impasse. The keep was Aerys's final stronghold, riddled with traps. Meanwhile, the city was gradually falling under the rebels' control, with Tywin's host arriving from the west. Another hour or two, and the Lannisters might show up at the keep, claiming to offer a backroute in, or demanding a share of spoils. Robert refused to be overshadowed. Stannis coughed. "If we do nothing, the king might light the fuses himself. He'd kill us all out of madness. If we storm in carefully, it could still end in fire. But at least we might have a chance to stop him." Ned felt a chill. "We'd need men who know the hidden passages, men who can move swiftly. The Master of Whispers might know some route that avoids the main corridors." He glanced at Varys, who stood off to the side, listening. Varys winced. "I know some passages, yes, but the pyromancers might be in any hallway. I can't guarantee success." Robert's voice hardened. "We gamble, or we lose. I'll not let Tywin claim the spoils, or let Aerys kill us all, while we wait like frightened rabbits. Varys, you lead me through these secret ways. I'll bring a handful of men, Stannis, Ned, a few more. We find Aerys, end him, seize the wildfire before he lights it." And Tumdim Karanin. Ned's stomach twisted. One spark, and all of them could die. But the alternative, letting the city burn or letting Tywin become the victor, was equally abhorrent. He looked at Robert's determined gaze, then gave a curt nod. "I'll go with you." Stannis steeled himself. "I will come as well." He gave a final glance at the black dragon. "Your beast cannot follow us indoors, so we rely on steel and cunning." Robert spoke to a nearby knight. "Keep the dragon here, ready to torch any Targaryen soldiers that try to sally out or hamper our retreat. Keep the rest of the host posted around the keep's perimeter. If the Lannisters arrive, keep them from interfering or from assaulting the keep themselves." The knight saluted, though he looked pale, as if aware that Robert was embarking on a suicidal mission. Varys beckoned them to a smaller side gate hidden in the outer wall. "Come quickly, before the king's guard sees us slip in. My knowledge of the passages might buy us enough time to reach the throne room unchallenged." Now, Robert, Ned, and Stannis each selected 4 guards, experienced men they trusted, to accompany them. Ned recognized a Karstark, a Manderly, and 2 men from the Vale among his group. They formed a small detachment of about 15 souls. The rest of the rebel army would remain outside, maintaining the siege. Quietly, they followed Varys to a postern half concealed by a collapsed scaffolding. The door was locked, but Varys produced a key from a hidden pocket, presumably an artifact of his many years gathering secrets in the Red Keep. The lock clicked, and the group slipped inside, stepping from bright chaos into the hush of shadowed corridors. Torches flickered on the walls, illuminating old stones. Far behind them, they could still hear the muffled roar of the black dragon, the distant clamor of men in the courtyard. Varys guided them through a winding route, turning at intervals into narrow passages that smelled of mildew. They climbed a cramped spiral staircase that threatened to collapse under Robert's bulk. Twice, they halted, hearing the shuffle of Targaryen guards nearby. But Varys found an alternate route. The group's tension was palpable. Each man clutched his sword hilt, half expecting a pyromancer to leap out with a lit torch at any second. Ned's heart pounded so loudly he was sure the others could hear it. The walls felt as though they were pressing in, and the fear of sudden green flame overshadowed every step. At length, Varys paused at a small archway opening onto a larger corridor. "This leads near the throne room," he whispered. "We'll have to move carefully. The king's guard or his pyromancers may be stationed near the doors. If we can slip inside while they are distracted." He trailed off, eyes anxious. Robert gripped his hammer. "One swift strike, that's all we need. Aerys can rattle on about his secrets, but once we have him by the throat, it ends." They emerged into a torchlit corridor lined with tapestries. Almost immediately, they saw 2 Targaryen guards at the far end, standing vigil near a set of tall doors. From behind those doors emanated a muffled voice, rising and falling in maniacal cadences. Even from here, Ned could guess it was Aerys Targaryen, ranting in some feverish state. He recalled the last time he had faced that voice, when his father and brother had been put to death. Fury churned in his belly. Robert nodded to 2 of his men. They crept forward, swords drawn. The Targaryen guards, startled by movement, barely had time to shout before they were silenced in a flash of steel. One guard toppled with a strangled cry, the other slumped with a blade through his chest. Robert's group seized the moment, rushing to the tall doors. 2 more men stood outside them, but these were novices, eyes wide at the sight of so many armed rebels. They dropped weapons rather than face the unstoppable wave. Now the door to the throne room stood before them, partly ajar. Within, torchlight danced across huge columns. At the far side, the Iron Throne loomed, a jagged silhouette of melted swords. Ned's pulse thundered in his ears as Robert shoved the doors open and surged into the hall. Hammer raised. Inside, the throne room was eerily vacant, save for a handful of pyromancers in green-stained robes clutching torches. 4 King's Guard knights flanked the throne's dais, white cloaks shining in the torchlight. And in the center, perched on the throne's blackened spikes, sat Aerys Targaryen, silver hair unkempt, eyes wild with mania. His robes were tattered, chest heaving as though he could barely contain the madness that boiled inside. A lit brazier stood to his right, bright coal smoldering with an uncanny greenish hue. At the foot of the dais stood Queen Rhaella, pale and trembling, her wrists bound. A guard held a dagger to her throat. Another guard pinned a handmaiden, who sobbed quietly. The room's air was thick with the smell of smoke, spilled lamp oil, and an undercurrent of something chemical. Wildfire's pungent taint. Aerys sprang to his feet, voice shrill. "Traitors!" he screamed. "You dare bring your filth here!" He gestured wildly to a cluster of clay pots stacked near the throne's base, each bearing the green flame insignia. "I will turn this city to ash. You cannot stop me. I am the king, and you will all burn." Spit flew from his lips as he cackled. Robert roared back, voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "It's over, Aerys. Your city is mine. Your guards are beaten. Surrender or die now." He advanced with his hammer, ignoring the king's guard arrayed before him. The pyromancers hovered uncertainly, torches clenched in sweaty fingers. Aerys clapped his hands like a mad jester. "Then we all die. Light them all." One of the pyromancers lifted his torch, eyes frantic. The king's guard around the dais sprang forward, determined to defend their liege. Chaos erupted. Robert barreled into one of the knights, smashing his hammer into the man's breastplate with a sickening crunch. A second knight lunged at Ned, who parried with an upward slash. Metal rang on metal. Stannis and the others engaged the remaining guards, swords flashing beneath the high windows. Meanwhile, one of the pyromancers flung himself toward the stack of wildfire pots. Ned caught sight of that movement and flung himself after the robed figure. Their shoulders collided, sending the pyromancer stumbling. The man twisted, torch still blazing, trying to ignite the nearest pot's fuse. Ned slammed a mailed fist into his face, knocking him to the floor. Another robed figure tried the same, but Stannis skewered him from behind before he could reach the pots. Aerys shrieked from the dais, scrabbling at the brazier. "Fire!" he hissed. "Dragon fire!" He tried to snatch a torch from one of the frantic pyromancers, but the man was struggling under Robert's blow. The queen cried out, tears streaking her cheeks as she was yanked aside by the guard who held her hostage. Ned blocked a thrust from the king's guard, catching the man's sword on his own blade. The guard kicked out, nearly unbalancing Ned, but a Karstark soldier lunged in to help. They drove the guard back, pinned him between two pillars, and finished him with a quick thrust. At the dais, Robert roared, bringing his hammer down on another knight's helmet, denting it inward. Blood spattered the throne's base. One last king's guard remained, valiantly fending off two rebels. Aerys, seeing his defenders fall, began scrambling to the side, yanking the queen with him. He snatched up a small dagger from a stand, pressing it to Rhaella's side. "Stay back," he screeched. "I will kill her. I will kill us all." His eyes blazed with madness. Robert advanced, chest heaving. "Let her go," he bellowed. "Your fight is with me." Aerys pressed the dagger tighter. "You think you win, but I have men throughout this keep, ready to light the fuses. Even now, you are too late." His cackle rose, a jagged sound. Ned felt every muscle in his body tighten. Could it be that the entire keep was set to explode at any second? He scanned the hallway for more pyromancers, but they all lay dead or wounded, their torches snuffed except one. That last torch had rolled across the floor, dangerously close to a spilled pot of something flammable. Ned lunged for it, kicking the torch away before the liquid could catch. Robert made a slow, deliberate step toward Aerys. "Release the queen. End this. You have nowhere to run." Aerys frothed at the mouth. "I am the king. I decide who burns." His wild eyes darted around as though searching for some missed opportunity. Then, with a burst of insanity, he shoved the queen aside and lunged for the brazier. Rhaella stumbled to the floor, letting out a gasp. Aerys plunged his hand into the glowing coals, gripping something that hissed with green sparks. The agony must have been excruciating, but his madness fueled him. "Burn them all," he screeched. Robert's hammer crashed forward, smashing into Aerys's shoulder and sending him reeling backward with a grotesque crunch. The object in Aerys's hand, some kind of small fire starter coated in wildfire paste, tumbled away. The Mad King hit the stone steps of the dais with a spine-chilling shriek, blood spraying from a shattered collarbone. Ned darted forward, seizing the sizzling device before it could ignite anything. The reek of burned flesh filled his nostrils. Aerys convulsed on the floor, eyes rolling back, mouth slack. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle escaped. Robert stood over him, panting, hammer dripping red. The hall fell silent, save for the queen's sobs and the rasp of dying men. The last king's guard had fallen. The pyromancers lay scattered, their torches extinguished. Wildfire pots remained unlit, deadly but dormant. Outside, the city still raged and smoked. But inside this throne room, the war's final heartbeat slowed to a hush. Robert raised his hammer again, as if to deliver a final blow. But Aerys had already succumbed to his wounds, breath stuttering to a halt. The Mad King lay in a twisted sprawl, eyes vacant. The last Targaryen king of that line was dead. Robert let out a roar, part triumph, part anguish, and flung his hammer aside, leaning against the dais. His chest heaved. Blood spattered the edges of the Iron Throne. Ned stepped to the queen's side, gently helping her to her feet. She trembled uncontrollably, eyes darting from Robert to her husband's corpse. She had bruises on her wrists, tears streaking her cheeks, but no mortal wound. Her ladies, likewise, had survived, though they were in shock. Ned felt a pang of pity for them. They were hostages of fate, no less. Robert finally spoke, voice hollow with spent rage. "It is done. The Targaryen reign ends here." He cast a look at the twisted corpse. Smoke still curled from Aerys's burned hand. The odor foul. Gather the wildfire. Snuff every torch in this hall. Will not let his final madness consume the city. Melmin. Ned gestured for the men to carefully remove the pots. Stannis barked orders, ensuring no stray spark could set them off. Varys hovered near a column, watching with an inscrutable expression. The queen sank to the floor in a broken sob. The body of her husband sprawled only feet away. No one spoke of her fate yet. As the flurry of activity commenced, Ned looked at the Iron Throne. It loomed over all, dark and jagged. Now it belonged to Robert Baratheon, the new king by right of conquest. The cost had been immeasurable. Blood, fire, the city in partial ruin. Dragons soared outside, and the realm would never be the same. Ned felt no elation, only a somber relief that they had at last halted the worst madness before it swallowed them all. Robert lifted his gaze to the throne, eyes full of exhaustion. "So it begins," he whispered, voice tight. He climbed the dais steps, stepping over Aerys's lifeless hand, and lowered himself onto the cold metal seat. For an instant, his face flickered with pain as he felt the barbs beneath him, the rough edges of 1,000 swords hammered into shape. But he did not flinch. He settled, letting his broad shoulders rest against the ancient steel. In that moment, the war ended, and a new era was born. Outside, the black dragon roared in triumph, echoing through the burning city. The sound mingled with the horns of the rebel army, the shouts of men claiming victory at last. Ned stood at the foot of the dais, sword still in hand, heart heavy with the knowledge that even with the Mad King dead, the future held unknown perils. The realm had seen dragons reborn, seen the old monarchy toppled by flame and blood. It would not soon forget. But for now, the throne room fell silent, but for the crackle of torches and the quiet sobs of the queen. Robert gazed across the wide chamber with grim finality, as though the ghosts of the Targaryens stared back from every shadow. Then he leaned forward, resting elbows on his knees, and let out a long, trembling breath. The burden of kingship, claimed by dragons and war, had settled upon him at last. And Eddard Stark, stoic and weary, bowed his head in acknowledgement of the new king. The friendship they shared, tempered by fire and fate, and the uncertain dawn that stretched ahead of them.